I was in the 1980 Olympic trials, and I was going to just continue to try for the 84. On one of my jumps, I had had a knee problem for a year. My knee just buckled. Like I planted and my knee just went. And instantaneously I knew that's it. Like I'm done. Every distraction in your life is going to take away from what you're doing, whether it's athletics or anything else for that matter. 100% of all your skills, talents, and abilities focused on the task at hand in the present moment. That's peak performance. We're clear about the problems that certain athletes bring to a whole team when they act out.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, what about the opposite? What when you have somebody who truly is other-focused and loves that person and wants the most for them? The only time you will ever truly be happy in life is when you've sacrificed. That's a tough lesson to learn, but it's all the other stuff is pleasure that could be momentarily satisfying, and then you are empty. The problem in our world today is that we are so distracted, and it can be filled by so many millions of things happening to us in every minute of the day, social media, whatever you want to pick out, that we don't ever take the time to reflect on why are we not happy.
I did really enjoy going to your son's wedding, who married our good friend's daughter.
Yeah, Gracie.
It's like a small Catholic world.
I know. And then you talk about huge families.
Oh,
so just sitting here right now, what do we have between us?
I got 16, 26.
26 children?
Yeah.
It's a village. I think this is kind of a cult show of some kind, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But the Hetzels have 9.
I think so. 9,
so
yeah.
I mean, you talk about big families coming together.
It was wonderful. Like it was one of the coolest things about that wedding was that like the bridesmaids, some of them were holding their babies.
Yes.
It was this,
or they're expecting.
And it's of course a beautiful church, a beautiful traditional liturgy. Yeah. But you could tell these families were so relaxed.
Yeah.
It was just relaxed, and like little kids are running all over the place. Yeah. And one of the bridesmaids was holding her kid
right
during the ceremony because they're just being normal people.
Right.
And they, there's so much pomp and circumstance with weddings.
Yeah.
That was not present at all.
No.
It was just a beautiful thing.
And it's also sometimes, depending on situations, but obviously everybody that's there, being in a Catholic church is like being home.
Yeah.
So everybody's completely comfortable.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what to do. We all know the prayers, and so forth. So it's it's great. It's a great family.
How's the newlywed couple doing?
They're doing great. They're out in Nebraska.
Okay.
Yeah. So Thomas is in law school.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So he's in his second semester of first year. So you can relate.
Oh, I can. That's hard. That's
it is really hard, right?
That's the washout period.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
so
awesome.
I think he's doing well, and he's such a good guy. He's a good leader. He's a good man. He is. And Gracie's wonderful. So we've been very blessed with marriages of our children so far. I mean, it's just been, thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. Yeah. So you're a father of 10. You're known as the guy who saved Belmont Abbey College.
Oh, please. don't even go there. Yeah.
You are.
No, we know where all the good comes from. Matter of fact, I would say God uses the most inadequate instrument to accomplish his will, so there'll be no mistaking his will.
Well, I can relate to that. So that's why I have 16 kids.
It's cooperating. You're doing your best to cooperate in whatever way you can.
Actually, you explained the difference. You actually explained magnanimity, the virtue of that in that way. It's like humility is recognizing our imperfections,
right?
And before God and neighbor, but magnanimity is the virtue where we're able to accept praise because we're just a vessel because
we know where the source of all the good came from, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, you're accepting it
on behalf of
God.
Yeah, that's right.
For his good work.
Yeah. So you're known as the guy who saved the college, and that's for real. You really are nationwide.
Oh,
truly,
you're killing me.
But you kind of came to the job with a fascinating background that most people have no idea about, and that's kind of where I wanted to. I said before we started recording, I really don't want to talk about running a Catholic college for a year, for an hour.
I'm happy.
Because it would take a year.
I'm happy about that. Yeah.
That's what good. You do all day. But you showed up as like a fascinating, you have your background is absolutely fascinating. And through the years, I guess 21 years now, I've known you.
It'll be, yeah.
And so in many of our conversations, whether it's at lunch or just sitting in the office or with people, we don't always just sit there and talk about college stuff. Like it usually
I think usually we don't.
We don't. It's good. Yeah, it goes other places. Yeah. But I'm fascinated that how often the sports psychology kind of comes up. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I wanted to focus. You wrote this amazing book for us a number of years ago, Less Than a Minute to Go, The Secret to World-Class Performance in Sport, Business, and Everyday Life. And as I went through it the second time, I just remembered that this book really does kind of explain who you are as a man. This isn't just like a big CV of like what you've done. This is the way you view the world. This is the way you view life. And I've seen that in your personal life, in your family life, our friendship, as a psychologist, as a devout Catholic, and as a college president. But sports psychology, is that the shortcut way of saying what you were before? You were an entrepreneur, did all kinds of things, but sports psychologist, is that how you kind of identified before you became the college president?
Let's put it this way. The pattern of becoming a college president was completely consistent with how I got into everything else I ever did, which means I had no business doing anything I've ever gotten into. So even becoming a psychologist, I never took a straight line. I've never taken a straight line to anything. It always seems like it's the most circuitous way to get to some place. I only can attribute to divine providence, like how I find myself in these different places. But my I don't even know if you want me to go here, but when I was at the University of Maryland, I competed in track and field. I was an All-American there, and I was training for the '84 Olympics. I was going to stay there and just continue to train. This was like 1982, and I just was going to stay there for the next couple of years and hopefully train and hopefully make an Olympic team. And I was running the high jump at one of these meets at the school. My coach had come up to me and said, "Would you run the women's high jump?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'll run it for you." So I'm running the women's high jump, and I can't help kibitzing. The women are jumping. I see all kinds of things that they're doing that they could improve on, right? So this one woman, her technique is really off, and so I start telling her things, and she's really good. Every time I told her something, the next jump she did it. Well, that day she PR'd by it was either 4 or 6 inches over her best, which is pretty substantial improvement in one meet. Yeah. And after the meet, this guy comes up to me and says, "Hi, my name is Dave Hemery, and I'd really like to have you come and be a coach at Boston University. We'll pay for your graduate school and everything, And I am dense. I am so stupid. I'm like, oh, well, thanks very much. It's like I'm blowing this guy up. But first of all, Dave Hemery, so people probably don't know his name. Dave Hemery was the Olympic gold medalist in the 400-meter hurdles in the '68 Olympics, broke the world record and won by the largest margin at the time in any Olympic event.
Wow.
He wasn't even in the frame of the shot that shows the photo finish.
Wow.
You have to look to the right of the photo. He's almost off the photo, right? Incredibly great man. And so he asked me this, and nothing goes from there. I don't know how he gets the phone number of the payphone in this dive that I live in called Ritchie Coliseum. It's a condemned building. All the track people, or most of us, live there. And there's a payphone in the hallway, and he would call this payphone. And one of the guys who had a room closer to the phone would answer it and come down and get me and say, "There's a guy calling you on the phone." I come up to the payphone. I talk to Dave, and Dave would inevitably say to me, "Really would like you to come and be a coach here." And I'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm trying. It's really interesting." I mean, we talked for a while. It was a good conversation. Hang up, no conclusion. He calls me every week for the entire summer.
Wow.
And I don't know why he did that, but it's August.
Wow.
And he says, "Bill, last call. Are you coming?"
Mm-hmm. A little pressure.
and I just heard myself say yes. And I hung up the phone. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to Boston."
It was like less than a minute to go to answer.
It was. So I ended up going up to Boston, and I had no plan. I just did not, even know I'm going to do necessarily sports psychology, right? So it turns out that his advisor, because he was finishing his PhD, his advisor, I guess just because of the circumstance, he said, "We'll be your advisor." And it turns out his name is Dr. Len Zykowski. Matter of fact, he just was at my house 2 days ago.
Really?
Yes.
Was this like a friend just coming to visit?
He was coming back from Australia. He'd been up in Boston. He was on his way back to Florida, and he just called me to say, "Hey, I'll stop by on my way." And it was great to see him, Yeah. But so it just shows a long relationship, very close friendship, great guy. But anyway, I start the sports psychology piece under him, and sports psych at the time, it's a little more established now, but at the time, there was no field of really sports psychology.
I had never heard of it until I met you. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and I was a sports fan.
You had to be an entrepreneur because you had to find your own way to make it work.
Right.
And he was a genius of like what's called motor learning control. And motor learning control is how you actually affect change of movement.
Isn't that what your PhD specifically in?
It's in sports psychology and human movement.
And human movement.
And the human movement is really the focus on the motor learning control, in terms of how, the wiring from your brain gets to your muscles to get you to move the way that you want to be able to move. And that was his expertise. He was also an expert in biofeedback as it related to sports performance. So it's a unique approach, but a lot of times, at least when I started, sports psychology would be either one of two extremes. Either you'd be a clinical psychologist who just likes sport and you just sort of wanted to work with athletes, but you didn't really have any background in it, or you were more of a physical educator or coach or something, but you liked the mental side of it, so you'd kind of try to do that aspect of it. I was very fortunate having competed and coached that I understood that aspect of it, but I also understood the psychology aspect of it, and I understood the motor control aspect. So it was kind of like, to me, the best of all worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you ended up, well, take us through the rest of your athletic career about how that kind of came to an end.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
Well, as I said, I competed at Maryland. I was going to continue to compete. I was in the 1980 Olympic trials, and I was going to just continue to try for the 84. My grandfather's from Ireland. Well, actually, three of my grandparents were from Ireland. And so he wanted me to go over to Ireland with him to meet all the relatives. And I thought, well, okay. I had graduated.
Was this your father's father or mother's father?
Mother's father.
Okay.
And so I
Thierfelder doesn't sound Irish.
Well, my dad's mom was Irish from Kerry.
Okay.
But my grandfather was from Germany. He had been born in the United States, but his immediate family had come from Germany.
Okay.
So that's the Thierfelder.
Okay.
It really should be Thierfelder.
Thierfelder.
That's the German pronunciation.
Okay.
But in the United States, it got Americanized to Thierfelder.
Well, same. I'm really thinking about saying Gallagher versus Gallagher.
Is that
English?
something?
Yeah, it drives me bonkers. So I think I'm going to start saying Gallagher.
You really confuse people.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, is that something I have to wait till like my parents die? Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to offend them or something. But,
all your kids will be completely confused. Half of them will be calling themselves Gallagher, and half will be Gallagher.
I know.
So.
But Gallagher does sound cooler, and so does
Thierfelder.
Thierfelder.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
right.
easier to say.
It is actually.
Tier.
Actually, all right. So I've told you, I've reminded you this multiple times, but I should probably tell the listeners. Like the first time I met you. And actually, I was thinking about it the other day because you posted something when you were at the March for Life. You posted a little video of you walking with the Belmont Abbey students. Okay. Well, 21 years ago, I was at the March for Life, and my dad told me, he said, the new president of Belmont Abbey College is there. Just look for the Belmont Abbey group and look for the really tall guy. Okay. So he had told me, go introduce yourself to Dr. Thierfelder. Okay. So I see the Abbey crowd. And I think I'm in law school at the time. And I go over there and I walk up to you. It's freezing cold. And I say, Dr. Dorflinger, it's nice to meet you.
I actually remember it.
And you're like, a Thierfelder, but yeah, okay.
It's nice to meet you too.
Oh, gosh. Way to introduce yourself,
That's
Conor.
Right. It was perfect.
Dorflinger.
We were probably all frozen anyway because it was probably like, 30 degrees and snowing.
Dorflinger came from.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was close enough.
It was close enough.
My name has been so abused over the years. It's been spelled Thierfiel, Serdef. I mean, it's like
just mix some letters
whatever
together.
it is, it's okay.
Sorry, a little detour. So you go to Ireland with your grandfather.
So I go to Ireland, and while I was there, I was still competing. And in Europe, they have a European circuit, like where the main track and field circuit goes around Europe, and they have two meets in Ireland. So I go to the first meet in Dublin, and it was sponsored by Coke, and I ended up winning the meet. And so I go back to my aunt's house, which is in Cork, and there's a knock at the door the next day, and like these two guys are at the door, and they say, "Oh, hey, how are you? Bill, is it right? And I said, "Yeah," and they said, "We're from St. Finbarr's Track Club, and we'd really like you to jump for us." And I'm like just kind of looking at these two guys thinking, St. Finbarr's Track Club, and you want me to jump for you? Like, what do you mean? And they go, well, the national championships is coming up, and we'd like you to jump for St. Finbar's. And I looked at them, I said, well, how can I jump in the national championship? I said, I'm American. They said, oh, no, we've checked. You have dual citizenship. And I said, really? I mean, how they even know this about me, I have no idea. And so I go, there's another meet that was actually in Cork. It was the Cork City Sport meet, and I won that meet. And they came back and said, oh, you must help us out. You're a Cork man, you know? And you said,
I don't even know who St. Finbar
that's
is.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Who is St. Finbar?
But I do like the name a lot.
Yeah,
right?
it sounds awesome.
So
and it's Finbar, and you jump over
there
a
you
bar.
go. I didn't put that ever together. That is good.
Providence at work.
It was right. So I ended up saying, you know, you get kind of in a crazy mood. You're over there, you're living there, and you know. And by the way, when I was there, it was the most peaceful, beautiful place, and it wasn't technology yet, and it wasn't the the tiger they talk about. I mean, it was like a very simple place, and so I don't know. You kind of almost get out of your normal mode, you know. And so I said, well, okay, you know, you sure I can do that? Oh, absolutely, you know. So I go to the national championships, and so I think the record in Ireland at the time was like 6'8" or something like that, 6 feet 8 inches. So the high jump official comes up to me and says, what height will you be coming in at? You know, and I said, 6'10". Oh, 6'10", you know, so I go up, I clear 6'10", I win the meet. They said, well, what do you want to go to now? And I said, why don't we go to 7'1"? You know, they did it in meters. I think it was like 216, but it was 7'1" and roughly. Something like that, right? So they looked at me in shock. And I looked at them like I wasn't quite getting what the thing was, right? They said, okay. They said, now, can you just wait a few minutes? And I said, sure. And I'm wondering, like, what am I waiting a few minutes for? So
they didn't have tall enough bars?
No. They actually stopped the meet. Now, this is in Europe. This is like where you have 10,000 people at a meet or more. I mean, the place is packed. I mean, people know track over there. They know, I mean, old grandmothers know like heights and times, you know, and so forth. And they make this announcement over the loudspeaker that this is the first time in history that an Irishman will be attempting to jump over 7 feet.
Oh, man.
I was so humiliated. I felt like crawling under a rock, you know, the first Irishman. I'm like, you know, and my name, you come back to the name, it's Thierfelder.
German
like,
Irishman.
I'm not even Thierfelder, you know, it's like, oh my gosh. So
Thierfelder. I'm not even Thierfelder. You should have told him that your name was Thierfelder.
I should have. So anyway, I clear it. And the place goes completely nuts, you know.
Billy Thierfelder.
And
awesome.
So, you know, and I stood out in Ireland. I probably stand out a lot of places, but I stand out because I am 6'8". And they're just, I mean, there are tall Irishmen, but
not like
I was clearly the tallest person almost anywhere I ever went.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking down the streets and people are looking at me, you know, and talking to me. And so it was a great experience. But I remember, just last thing, so I've won the national championships, so I'm on the national team now, you know, preparing for the Olympics, and I've qualified. And they say, well, we need to get you a uniform. So I was jumping for Nike at the time, and over there they were Adidas, you know. So they said, we've got to get you a proper kit. We've got to get you the proper uniform. And I said, you know, sure. So they give me this uniform, and it's the largest, biggest one they have.
That they have.
I look like I'm wearing capri pants. I mean, I have to march into a stadium with the Irish national team, and my pants are at my shins. I got these things pulled down. When I say below my waist, I have my sweat top outside as far down, and it's at the bottom of my sweat top. You know, I mean, I could hardly walk because you know my legs were impeded because my waistband was stopping me from moving.
Oh my god!
And then I get out on the high jump apron, and when I was competing against guys like Dwight Stones, which people, you know, now it's too old, they wouldn't know, but Dwight Stones was the American record holder, actually world record holder, and the other Americans were there. So I'm now walking out with this Irish kit on, and they look at me and they're like, "What are you doing?" You know, and I always felt a little ugh. And then, long story short, it's the summer before the Olympics, And it was actually at the national championships.
Where?
It was in Ireland.
It's still in Ireland.
Yeah. And I jump, and on one of my jumps, my knee, I had had a knee problem for a year. So I was kind of trying just to nurse this through and make it, right? My knee just buckled. Like I planted and my knee just went. Like, I mean, there was no resistance. I just kind of went right to the ground. And instantaneously I knew that's it. Like I'm done. And the guy who was in charge, Ronnie Long was one of the coaches, but it was, I apologize for blanking on his name. Guy who was in charge of the whole BLE, which was the athletic association, came up to me afterwards and said, don't worry, like we'll have another, opportunity to meet, before the games and so forth. And I said, I'm done. I said, I just know this is it. Like I'm not going to be able to jump. They said, "What? Don't make that decision now." And I said, "I know it's now." So I thanked him profusely, but I had felt so obligated that they had put me on this Olympic team and the national team and so forth. I did not want to take advantage. So I probably could have stretched it out. I probably could have gone and maybe not competed, or gone and maybe not competed. I got off the ground. I just didn't think that was the right thing to do. I felt like that would be using them in some way. So I just withdrew at that time. It was at that need.
Tell us about your emotions when that happened.
Complete peace. I had been going to daily mass, and I had trust in divine providence. I had it completely in God's hands. Like, if this was not meant to be, then this is not meant to be, and I'm completely good with that. I was so blessed with all the opportunities I had. I competed in other places in Europe. I've been a national champion. I was a U.S. national medalist in the national championships, All America. I mean, I had such great experiences, and life was so good. Only to be thankful for everything that I had. As a matter of fact, I often said, if you took everything away from me at that moment, that I would, for the rest of my life, I'd take everything away from me. I could never be thankful enough for the rest of my life for all that I had been given up to that time. So I just was at complete peace with it. People thought that was weird. I mean, people thought I should have been depressed and I should have been upset or some kind, and I just wasn't.
What do you tell people that are depressed, are frustrated or angry, when kind of tragedy like that hits their life? You've counseled a lot of people.
You can't.
How do you walk them through it?
You can't just come out and say that, because well, it depends on who they are and where they are, right? So sometimes if somebody's at a certain place, they can hear certain things. But if they're not ready for that, you can't start there. But that is the answer. In other words, it's just completely recognizing that anything we have is a gift from God, and we're stewards of it, and we're just called to do the best we can with what we've been given.
On that note, by the way, my wife knows a mother just had a baby prematurely, and during the operation, they found that she has a tumor in her chest, and it's pretty serious. And so my wife, I don't know the lady, but my wife sent her a book that you cite to, and we've talked about many times, Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence.
Yeah.
And she sent her that book, and I kind of looked at my wife and I said, I hope you know what you sent her. And she did, because she had read the book, but I was like, that's a serious book.
Yeah.
You have to be at a certain point in your life where that book can make any sense to you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And she said, yeah, she's there. She's ready for this. But it was that thought process. You can't just dump that little book on anyone, because
you can't tell people, hey, don't worry about it.
Right.
It's like, well, they are. And so how do you help somebody not to worry? And a lot of that, I mean, again, these things we could talk about for hours, literally. How do you help somebody go from where they currently are to get to a point or a place where they can be at peace with whatever's happening? I mean, from a Catholic perspective, it's a hard truth that we can find joy in suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems so counterintuitive. Like, what do you mean? We got to get through the suffering so we can have joy. So how can we have joy in suffering? I mean, that seems like it's like one of those impossibility kind of things, You
incorporated this theology into your sports psychology practice when you were working with athletes. Tell us about that.
Well, this should not be a revelation to anybody. We are body, mind, and soul all at the same nanosecond. It's interesting to me, though, that as human beings, what we tend to do is compartmentalize. And so we put each of these things in boxes. We say, over here's kind of the mental skills or some mental thing. Oh, over here's all our physical training and things we're going to do. Oh, and over here we're going to pray, or there's going to be some sort of spirituality. The reality is we're all three things. I realize to talk about them, we do tend to split them up to talk about them, but we can never lose sight when we do that we're actually all three things at the same moment. So it's not, I mean, to be honest with you, it just makes complete logical sense. I mean, all I'm doing is what's true. So when I work with a human being, I'm working with the whole human being, body, mind, and soul. Like, how could I leave some part of them out and say, well, that's really not important right now. We're only going to deal with the mental part of this. Well, it's attached, your brain's attached to your body. And most athletes I worked with, I will tell you, came to me originally for a physical thing. They think they just need one thing. Like, I want to improve my 40 time. I want to, whatever. And of course, I look at them, and I have a thing I can do with somebody right in the very first minutes I meet them. And believe it or not, I can assess almost everything about them, like in the 10 minutes. I mean, physically, spiritually, mentally, I can pick up everything almost about them. I don't mean their whole history. I'm talking about I can tell how they operate physically, mentally, and spiritually, like within 10 minutes.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because that's a pretty bold claim. Yeah.
Well,
that's amazing.
It's just observational.
I'm not doubting because I see you do it, but tell us about that. Like, because I think people hear it now say, like, what do you mean? What does that mean?
Well, it sounds like if I had an athlete, right? I worked with, for example, a lot of NFL wide receivers. I could take a little rubber ball, and I could say, okay, I'm going to toss you this ball, and I'm going to call the hand you got to catch it with, left or right, and I'll say, are you ready? And I look at them, and they're standing straight up in the air, and they say, yeah. Now, I know right now, no, you're actually not ready, because you're not going to be able to move. If I drop this ball right here, there's no way you're going to be able to move to get it, right?
Actually, do you know you did that to me one time?
I remember.
It shocked me. I'm like, oh, man, I thought I was ready. And you just dropped the ball. We're 10 feet apart from each other. And you're like, okay, get ready. I'm like, I'm ready. Yeah, throw me the stupid ball, Bill. Yeah. And then you drop it. And I'm like, oh, man. I felt like I was tricked. But it's not a trick.
No, it's not a trick at all.
Yeah.
But so as you progress somebody through that, what you start to see is that, okay, physically, I'm starting to see how they move. I'm starting to see their coordination. I'm seeing their flexibility. I'm seeing their strength. I'm seeing just how they move, right? What I also start to see is based on how they respond, like when I drop that ball, instead of somebody being at peace with that and just saying, I get it, right? There's usually a reaction.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody does, right? I mean, if I toss somebody a ball and they drop it, their first thing isn't like, well, let me just tell you what happened on that. It's more like, I can't believe it, And either they're depressed about it or they're angry about it or something, right? And of course, during that anger and depression and everything else that they're having, what don't they know?
They've lost all
why they dropped the ball, right?
They've lost the whole point.
They lost it, right? So, but the point is, I see how they react then to things.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to almost sense, I'm getting like how mentally you start to think about things. And then I also pick up quickly on their spirituality. In other words, are they relying totally on themselves, or do they have a sense there's something more profound and something deeper than themselves that's actually motivating them to even do this thing that they're doing? And in 10 minutes, I get that. Working with somebody.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when you became a sports psychologist and you started working, how did you start getting professional athlete clients? I mean, how did that? You're an entrepreneur. Did you hang a shingle and they're like, hey, if you're an NFL athlete, come talk to me and I'll improve your game? Like, how do you become a paid sports psychologist?
Well, actually, I'll tell you this. I was probably never a paid sports psychologist. I was a sports performance consultant. And the reason I say that is because of what I just described. Sports psychology seems very narrow, like we're only going to deal with kind of the mental part of your game. And I'm dealing with the whole person, right? So, and I'll maybe talk about that in a minute. But so my point is, I really look at somebody as a whole person. So, the sports psychology thing starts off with really sports performance and understanding the human person. Like anybody starting out a business, I mean, you don't start with pro athletes, right? So, you start working with high school athletes, and you're going over some of the coaches, and you're doing talks, and you're doing all kinds of stuff. And obviously, if what you do actually works, you get people who want it, right?
But how did that profession start? Okay, so you get your PhD, and then what'd you do?
Oh, wow, you do really want to know that?
Yeah, I do. It's fascinating because I'm kind of curious how you became this guy who was working with world-class athletes. But there's a big gap between you blowing your knee out and
Yeah.
working with NFL wide receivers.
Well, my wife Mary's a physical therapist. She graduated from Boston University, as did I. I did graduate school. She did undergraduate there. And I would work with, part of my graduate work was working with teams and working with some really good athletes. And probably the first pro guy I ended up working with was, I think it was Billy Smith. It was a wide receiver. And he ended up playing, I think he went to the Patriots at the time, but that was maybe the first person I worked with that kind of went to the pros in football. Then it's like reputation, like people start to know that you do something and it seems to work. So you suddenly get more people. I had a guy, John Nimick, who was ranked number 2 in the world in squash, who was in Boston, who came to me. So you just start getting, athletes coming to you that hear about you and they realize that you do something that helps people get better at what they do, not necessarily just mental.
So you get a phone call from a squash player, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you grew up watching squash like you do football.
Yeah.
So before you meet with that guy, do you go to the local YMCA and watch a bunch of squash matches? Because there was no YouTube. So are you going are you like scouting out squash players and watching the game? So you're like, okay, I see what these guys are doing, to try to prepare yourself?
Well, it's a really good question, a good, insightful question. Here's what's in my favor, or anybody's favor, to be honest. The sport is the detail, but it's a human being doing whatever sport we pick up, right? So there's certain physiology, it's going to be common. There's certain biomechanics, like, the way people move, or, the way people think. I mean, so to be honest with you, the vast majority of anybody doing anything, you kind of already have.
Right.
So then to your point, it's the nuance of like that particular sport that you're going into, right?
That's
so,
like the last 20% or something.
I don't even know how to get a percentage, but in a way, it might even be less than that in some way, because it's really the other thing. So the point is, if I didn't know anything about squash and I couldn't even understand how the sport worked, could I still help somebody? The answer is probably yes.
Mm-hmm. Now,
if you understand the sport, and then all you gotta do is watch the sport and you realize you pick up immediately on the physiology, the biomechanics, basically sometimes it's knowing the rules that took you longer than actually figuring out, the nuances of how to actually do it.
Yeah.
So, he came to me, I ended up working with him. He did very well. And
what's the kind of thing that you would help him with?
Well, I want to be careful because some people, it's kind of confidential what I've done with them.
Sure.
And I keep that confidential. And then there's others who are fine, it's public and, I can talk about them. So I won't go necessarily into that at this point. I'll give you an example, though, of something to the point of your question. So this woman comes to me. Her first name is Joan. And she's either she's on or trying to make the U.S. women's ice hockey team. And she's a goalie. And she says, she tells me, I really need your help. She's a really good goalie. I mean, she's really good. But she has this one problem. When she drops to block a shot, it takes her forever to get back up. That's just one example. And then so the rebound she could get scored on because she's not recovering.
She knew that?
She knew that.
Okay.
Right. So I say to her, first thing, I said, Joan, I know nothing about ice hockey. Like, I haven't played ice hockey, nothing. She goes,
I'm Thierfelder from Ireland. We don't even have ice hockey.
That's right. We've never even seen ice, except in our drinks.
Sorry. Keep going.
So she says, that's okay. She goes, I really think you can help me. And I'm okay with you not knowing ice hockey, right? So I said, okay. So we scheduled an appointment. So to your point, I went out to, at the time it was Dick's Sporting Goods, and I bought a pair of ice hockey skates. I went over to an ice skating rink. I put the skates on. I went out into the middle of the ice, and I got down, and I said, okay, what's the fastest way of getting up?
Wow.
And I realized, and again, I was very fit. I mean, I was at that point still at an Olympic level body and strength and speed and even mental piece. So I have my legs splayed out there on the ice, and I'm like, okay, how would I get up right now into like a squat position? And I realized you could just pop up, like you can just pull your knees up really quickly, and you're suddenly sitting there like in a squat.
Right.
So I figured that out. I had no idea that that's how you do it, but I figured out how to do that. So that when I saw her, I then taught her how to do that. But I'll tell you one little funny story. So she wants to do other things. And part of it was not that she has to skate outside the goal much, but I was trying to work on a little bit of overspeed. This is probably my newness in sports performance. She says, I'm willing to do anything. I said, okay, I got something. It was really used more in track, but I think we can use it here in hockey, right? So I got this bungee cord. It's about, with unstretched, it's about 10 yards maybe long. And I said, you stay down here. She's at the end of the ice. I said, I'm going to stretch this out. And when I say go, you're going to skate as fast as you can, and the bungee cord's going to assist you. It's going to help you kind of with overspeed, be able to move faster than you can really move, right? I stretch this thing out the whole length of the ice. And I turn around and I go, are you ready? She goes, yes. I said, go. She lifts up one foot, and the stretch on the bungee cord was so great that as she lifted up her foot, her whole body slammed into the ice face down, and she was dragged across the ice.
Oh my God.
The entire length of the hockey arena. And when she finally stopped in front of me, she lifted up her face. It's covered with like frosted ice in her hair, her eyebrows and everything. And she looks at me like she is going to kill me. And I said, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. Let's go to drill 2.
And then you said, and that lesson's for free. That one's on me.
But if you saw this, it was like almost like a cartoon.
A cartoon.
I mean, she hit the ice and like just shot across it.
Oh, that's awesome.
But the point being, you can figure things out. And then once you start working in the sports that even you haven't done, you get better and better at them and really start to figure out. And sometimes, believe it or not, you have a fresher eye coming into a sport that has like traditions, like crew. I work with a lot of crew athletes, and I was good on a concept 2 rower, but I'm not a rower. But there's traditions, just like the way they train. So like crew athletes would tend to be doing like 200 reps with like a 50-pound weight or a 90-pound weight or something, right? Being that, well, we're gonna have to do all these reps. It's not really, we don't have to lift that much weight. We're never exerting that much force. So like we just need to do that a lot. Well, yeah, there's some truth in that, but everything's a percentage of your absolute. So if I just took, let's say 100 pounds and said, okay, I want you to squat that as many times as you can. Well, if your absolute best lift is 100 pounds, you're only going to be able to do it once.
Right.
Okay. If your best squat is 400 pounds, well, 100 pounds is a small percentage of that. You could do a lot of reps with that. So it's understanding physiologically how the body works and how you put together training.
So what? So as your clientele kind of increased, it was made up of different sports.
I worked with almost every sport you could think of. I mean, I work with dart throwers, horseshoes.
Are you serious?
Yeah, equestrian riders, and then I worked with all the pro sports, meaning the ones that are established pro sports in the United States. So I worked with players in the NHL. I worked with tennis players, pro golfers, both men and women, pro basketball, pro baseball, pro soccer, pro football, obviously. Yeah. So I kind of worked with everybody. And what I found over time is that time was the issue. I really enjoyed working with golfers and tennis players. It just was too time consuming. You'd go out to a tournament with somebody, and in golf, it depends on whether they make the cut or not.
Right.
But like you could end up being there for like 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
And it was hard to justify 5 or 6 days to be there for maybe just even one athlete. And even if they paid me well, which many did, it was away from home all that time. And tennis was very, very similar to that. So football, I really liked, and I had a lot of experience working with players and helping them through the combine, the NFL combine, to prepare to get drafted and so forth, and then worked with a lot of players in the NFL. I liked it because it was a discrete season. At the time, there was TiVo, which is like I could record every single game there was in the NFL, so I could see everybody that I worked with play their games. Mm-hmm. I could talk to them by phone. I could still go to some games. They could come to me. It worked out really well.
Yeah, it was efficient,
and I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
So if you were working with NFL, give us some of those examples. Some of those stories, like who you were working. Like you don't have to say names, but the kind of people you were working with, or
some I could talk about. I mean, some I. It's interesting in pro sports, especially the NFL. players didn't necessarily want anybody on their team, meaning the coaches or medical staff or anybody else, to know they were working with me.
It was kind of an internal competition. Like they wanted to excel.
Internal competition, but they also didn't want, like let's say somebody had an injury, something's bothering them.
Oh, they don't
want to tell.
Right.
I mean, unless it's something they have to. I mean, they don't want to divulge that. But if they can come talk to me, and I had all the resources to have them see an orthopedic or physical therapist or whatever it might have been. I had like a network that I had put together. So for them, that was confidential and a way for them to take care of whatever they needed to do. And then sometimes from the sports performance standpoint, if I'm working on, like, say, I don't know, their ability to tackle or whatever it might be, they wouldn't want their positions coach to think that somehow they're not good, which isn't the case at all, but they were coming for something very specific. And so they just didn't want to create
I can see that creating
problem.
drama of like,
yes.
Oh, well, you don't think the coach is good enough, I have to go get another coach kind of thing.
Right.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
So if you were helping somebody learn how to tackle better, how do you do that? What are you doing? What are you talking to them?
Well, it's when you're tackling somebody, it's all about positioning. So in other words, you've got to get to a place where you can tackle somebody to start with. But then when you're actually going to tackle somebody, did you do martial arts?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so maybe you'll relate to this. Yeah. Human beings are interesting, right? When you touch a human being, like even just a handshake or touch somebody's wrist or something, it may be only 100th of a second, but there's like a pause.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting phenomenon. Like when you touch, there's like this momentary recognition that somebody's touching you.
Right. It's probably the body and mind are trying to figure out what to do next.
Yes. But in athletics, you can't have that pause happen when somebody touches you. Okay?
Interesting.
The other is
the momentum stopped, everything stopped, and then you're vulnerable.
Or just there's a fraction of that second where it's just not fluid, right?
Right.
But here's the other important part, and this is like maybe the martial arts piece. And we won't do it right now, but if I was going to lightly punch you in the chest, okay, most people would think, there's your chest, I punched you in the chest. But in martial arts, you're not seeing the chest. I'm actually seeing your spine.
Yeah.
So when I go to move my hand, I'm moving my hand to your spine.
Yes.
This front part doesn't even exist.
That's why they actually teach you to break boards. It was like young kids, like they had you doing that to punch through. If you hit the surface of the board, it's just going to hurt.
Right. Exactly.
But they're teaching you to punch through.
So when you tackle, you don't even see the front of the person or the side of the person, like whatever part you're hitting, you are going through the person.
Okay.
And that is really powerful because when you, as you know, breaking a board or whatever it might be, when you move through a person like they don't exist in the front, that is unbelievable force that's being applied.
Yeah.
So one, it's getting in the right positions, it's being focused. I mean, see, again, it goes back to, it's not just the physical act of tackling somebody. It's like a spot. Like if you're a corner and you got to cover somebody, that's why people get faked out because, wide receiver's moving and the DB's trying to follow that, right? And they could be very fast and they're trying to follow the person. But I'll tell you what, if you focus on a spot, like if you picked out a spot on my tie, literally like a tiny spot, and try to look at it in detail, and I said, just do not let that spot get away from you, I could do anything in the whole world that you will have locked on me like a cruise missile. Yeah. There's no getting away from that spot. But very few people know to have that kind of focus.
I know I'm playing basketball, even just pickup ball as getting to be older, playing pickup ball with my teenage or college sons.
Dangerous.
It is. I'm just like, the whole game for me is don't get hurt again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tore my calf muscle a couple years ago, and I can still feel it act up. Yeah. But my whole game is to like not get hurt. But I've noticed as I've gotten older and I'm relying a lot less on agility.
Yeah.
And I'm actually trying to outthink my kids on defense when my son's trying to juke me out. I have noticed that I'm trying to get a certain level of concentration and look at a certain part of his body.
Yes.
Because if I'm like looking at his shoulders or something, I get
first move.
Right. Or his head,
Right.
So I'm trying to look more at his torso because his body's not going to go very far from his torso. So that's kind of what you're talking about.
That's the same thing, right? I mean, you almost say, even pick the center of gravity. Like center of gravity, that has to move.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can't move, right?
Yeah.
But it's just a different way of understanding how you master certain skills. And believe it or not, I find it kind of interesting that these things aren't well known. kind of this whole way of approaching working with someone.
Even in professional
Even in professional sports, it's not. A matter of fact, pro sports, for the most part, they're just assuming you're great. That's why we're paying you all this money to come here. We expect you to perform. So yeah, there's coaching, but
you would think that teams would employ a sports psychologist like this.
They do. They employ sports psychologists, but again, this is my bias. This is this is how I approach it. All the training in the world, all the mental skills in the whole world, if they do not result in you being significantly better at what you do when you're doing it in real competition,
what's the point?
It was a nice exercise, right. But like, what good was it, right? So I'm always starting from that premise, which is not, hey, we're going to do some peripheral things and nibble around the edges of this. I'm getting right to like the thing you do. And then are you doing that to the very best of your ability or not?
Yeah. Now, multiple times in my relationship with you and your book, that idea of focus, where you're like, if you see a certain spot on my tie, like this is a common theme for you. Why don't you unpack that a little bit? Because this ability to focus with extraordinary precision on one particular thing has many positive ripple effects. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about that, because you just gave that example of if you're going to work on tackling somebody or playing defense on a wide receiver who's juking you out, or in basketball. Right. But this has a lot of examples in the broader life. You apply this to everything. Right. Yeah. So I don't know how well people can see that on their screen. Yep, they can.
Okay. Now, if you look at it though, inside the letters, it's not completely filled. Like there's some blue little spots and marks inside each of those letters, right?
Inside the white, yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at the A, and you look to the right of the
Which
A.
Which one? The second A or the first A?
The LAG, in the very middle. If you look at that A, and you look to the right of it, you can see there's two brighter blue spots. There's actually three together there, right?
The cluster, yeah.
Do you see the smallest one?
Of the three?
Yes.
Yes, in the bottom left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, right now, were you just thinking about breakfast?
Absolutely not, yeah.
For a fraction of a second, you were like, what is he talking about? Like, and your whole mind, body, and soul for a fraction of a second was inside that little dot, okay? So first of all, I'm now showing you what actual focus is.
Yeah.
That's focus, right? Now, the problem is when most people do something, they've done it a lot of times, it'd be like us now saying, yeah, okay, I see it. Yeah, okay. Right. No, you just looked. You're not actually focused. Now, here's the important thing. Attention to detail is the secret to complete absorption of what you're doing. When you stop paying attention to detail, you stop being focused. So the challenge would be, imagine if we had to do that 100 more times today, and then we're going to do that every day. That would be a discipline on your part to still go with the same intensity to try to see the details in that smallest of dots on that A.
Yeah.
But if you did that, you would be completely absorbed. And that's why you hear people use the term in the zone or, peak performance, whatever it might be. It's when you're so focused, you become literally just absorbed in the present moment to the point that you don't even realize you're in the present moment. The problem with peak performance is that after you've had them, you don't even know how you had them. Like you just know you had it. You hope it comes back, but you have no idea how you got there. The point is they're more reproducible than people know.
Teresa of Avila talks about a nun that was in her convent that really wasn't very intelligent and didn't know hardly any prayers except for the Our Father. And when she would pray it, she wouldn't get past Our Father.
I love it.
And that's that level of intense focus. Yeah. Probably she's thinking about the words Our Father in a way that you and I aren't doing it. We're just rattling off prayers.
Right. Exactly.
It's the same idea, isn't it?
It is. And again, just say that phrase, Our Father, like think of all that means. And even think about what you may not know about it, what you should even be trying to understand about it. I mean, you could just go, and to say our, just the word our. What does that mean?
Mystical body of Christ. You could write a whole dissertation on our, for sure. I'm sure they have.
I know you could.
No.
For sure.
Yeah, it would. That's a fascinating thing.
Yeah,
it's a fascinating thing. I mean, I was talking to you earlier about my new obsession, which is the Song of Songs or Canticle of Canticles.
Yeah.
It's 6 pages in Scripture. And Bernard of Clairvaux wrote 4 volumes of commentary. And in fact, he only got through about half of it. So he wrote more than a book
Right.
per page of the Bible,
Right.
of commentary, and he died before he finished.
Yeah.
And he started it as a young man.
That almost reminds me, though, of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The president of Harvard spoke before him, I think, for 2.5 hours. And then Lincoln gets up there and speaks for like 2 minutes,
2 minutes,
right?
yeah.
And then he gets down, like there's complete silence. And Lincoln actually leans over to someone and says, "Well, I guess something like, that dog doesn't hunt," or
That
something.
dog don't hunt.
That dog don't hunt, or something like that. It wasn't well received.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, the president of Harvard said to him, "You captured," and I think it's 246 words is the Gettysburg Address. And he said, "You captured in like 2 minutes what it took me 2 hours to try to say." Wow. In some ways, right? So it's marvelous, and I think this is like the simplicity of things. Usually, what happens, I see, is that you take a subject that you don't know well, and you can't say much about it. Matter of fact, if you were trying to teach me about something that I just didn't know about, you might be at a point where you've gotten all the complexity that there is that there could possibly be in this thing. And if you're at that point and now you're trying to tell me about it, I'm probably going to be lost.
Yeah.
Because you're just giving me too much. But then if you keep going, eventually you get to a point where you synthesize that thing down to its most simple concept that you can. Now, me, a person who doesn't know anything, you've in maybe the most simple ways have helped me to gain the insight that it took you going through all the complexity to finally come down and give me the conclusion.
As our mutual friend Kevin Kennelly always talks about, the simplicity on the far side of complexity.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know if he came up with it, but
no, that was Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, he said, I wouldn't give a fig for complexity on the near side, for simplicity on the near side of complexity, but I would give my life for simplicity on the far side of complexity.
That's awesome. Yeah, Oliver Wendell, I should know that. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. The jurist, or his father, was a writer.
I think it was the jurist.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. All right, so you work with, back to kind of I think it's a fascinating career. So you're working with these athletes. You're teaching NFL stars how to tackle. You're teaching squash players how to do whatever. You're teaching goalies how to pop up.
Golfers.
Players, yeah. You have back to this kind of focus thing. I don't know if this fits in the focus category, but I remember that you took a professional golfer and taught them how to putt by having them hit golf balls with their eyes closed.
Right. Yeah.
So what's that all about?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I'll tell you the one story because it was the most dramatic. I've worked with people on tour, LPGA tour, PGA tour, right? But there was a golfer who was a pro at a club, and he needed the pros to get that have to go through a test to actually get that pro designation at a golf club. And he had to take the test, and you had to play, I think it was 3 rounds, and you had to score a certain level in order to get it, right? And he was extraordinarily nervous, and he was particularly nervous when he was putting. And he really got nervous if anybody watched him. So the way I know somebody is, instead of you telling me about like what you think the problem is and so forth, I say, okay, let's go out. So we go out to a regulation golf course, and I just watch. I said, play a couple of holes. Let me just watch you. Because again, I go back to, if I watch somebody, I sort of learn everything about them, right? So I kind of see his thing. So I put down 3 balls. We're about maybe 75 yards from this green. And I put them down. I said, go ahead, hit these 3. So he hits the 3 up onto the green, but they're all like 30 feet, 35 feet, 40 feet away from the hole. So as we're walking up to the green, it just turns out that the whole landscaping crew, there were about 8 of them, tractors, all kinds of stuff, all of them had just come to this green. And they see us walking up, and so they all stop, and they're like leaning back on the tractors and everything else, and there's 8 of them there, right?
Yeah.
And these people all work at the club,
right?
And they know who he is. And I can see as he's walking up there that he is getting, like he's starting to die. I mean, really, it was really strong. So he gets up to the first ball, and he's going to putt it, and I said, and I could just see this was going to be almost an embarrassment for him in some way. So I thought I'd take the pressure off of him in some way, and I said, I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes when you hit this ball. And before you open them, I want you to tell me where the ball went. Did it go left or right, far or short of the hole? So in a way, I kind of saw it was almost like a little relief because now he's going to hit, with his eyes closed. So he goes up. This ball is 40 feet from the hole. And it's an undulating green. It's not even a flat green. He hits the ball, goes up this little undulation, down this one, up this one, rolls, curves, and goes into the hole. Now, we were close enough that all the grounds crew could hear that I had asked him to close his eyes. And I hear one of them say, did he have his eyes closed? And the guy goes, yeah, I think he did. So then, first of all, this guy's amazed that the ball went in.
Yeah.
I mean, he's almost like in shock. It wasn't like he was happy or sad or anything. He just didn't even know what to make of it. Right. So he goes up to the second ball. He lines it up. I said, close your eyes. You're going to tell me again where it went. He hits the ball up and down and over, and it goes into the hole again. Well, these guys now on the tractors are like, they're all looking at each other, and like I can hear them like whispering and talking to each other and so forth. And then this guy who just hit the ball in is still kind of in disbelief that the ball has gone in. So I said, let's do it one more time. And so he goes up to the ball and again closes his eyes, and he literally, this is like almost
hard to believe. Right.
He sinks the third ball with his eyes closed. And now the guys on the tractors just go crazy and like they start cheering and everything. Well, this guy went from like crawling up onto the green. Suddenly his chest is out and he's like walking off the green like he's on top of the world, But my point there is I've had more people sink putts with their eyes closed than open. And I've had somebody do it actually in a tournament. They had one guy, I won't say who, on a PGA tour, and he just was not having a good day. And he gets up to the green and he has maybe a 20-foot putt, or whatever it was. And he, in his head, said, what the heck? He closes his eyes, he hits it, and it goes in. And it was like, it flipped his whole game around like at that moment, because then he realized, what am I doing? Like he was back to like some of the old stuff he had been, and that kind of almost like shook him out of it. But the point is, people say, well, how can that be? Like, how do you put balls with your eyes closed? It's actually not that mysterious. 70% of our vision takes up 70% of our attention, which means then you only have 30% left on other things like kinesthetic awareness, being able to feel your body in space kind of thing, right? So when you close your eyes, 100% of all that you have is actually only focused on the two things that affect where the ball's going to go. The amount of force you're putting into it and the angle of the club head. And you can feel those like amazingly well. You can get to where you feel, I mean.
The sight is distracting.
It can be. I mean, obviously, you need sight to do certain things. If a ball's being thrown at you, you need sight, okay? But in this case, it's an activity where the ball's not moving. And all you got to do is be able to feel the force you're hitting it with and the angle that you hit it at. And you can get amazingly good at it. As a matter of fact, this was another amazing one. I was giving a talk, and I was doing a sports performance talk, and I asked for a volunteer from the audience to come up, and this young guy comes up, and I did the golf thing on the stage, right? So it's on a stage, so I couldn't put down a hole, right? So I put a little bottle, it was like whiteout or something, that was maybe 15 or 20 feet away. I put down a couple of balls. As a matter of fact, I put down 5 balls, and I said to him, okay, I want you to try to hit the whiteout bottle, right? He gets up there, hits first one, hits the bottle. Second one hits the bottle. Third one hits the bottle. Fourth one hits the bottle. Fifth one he misses. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a terrible, terrible like thing here because he's going to do worse. I'm going to try to show something that would make you better, and he's going to absolutely, be worse. So I thought, well, I started this. I might as well just keep going, see what happens with it, right? So I said, well, now what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to tell me where the ball goes. Does it go left or right, far or short, before you open your eyes? And I'll tell you right now, the reason I'm repeating that, everybody wants to open their eyes immediately.
Right.
As soon as you hit the ball, everybody opens their eyes. I'm like, sometimes I have to say, what did I tell you? Don't open your eyes. You got to tell me first where it went. This guy hits 5 in a row with his eyes closed. Mm. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, thank you, Jesus, right? Because he actually did better, right? And I said to him, what sport are you in? And he goes, I'm a wrestler. And I said, you are in the wrong sport. You should be in golf, But the point being, when your eyes are closed, 100% is focused on feeling the force you're hitting with and the direction that your hands are turned on the club head. And you can be amazingly precise at being able to feel what you did with that.
I'm positive of this reality because even when I shoot foul shots, to this day, I go out and shoot foul shots all the time with my kids, and I just make them rebound for me so I don't have to move. That's awesome. But very frequently I have closed my eyes and start shooting, and what I can tell is that all of a sudden I feel like I'm off balanced, or my elbow's flaring.
Yes, very good.
Or my hand goes left or right.
Yep.
And you are 10 times more aware of your body when you close your eyes.
Absolutely.
I've noticed that many times.
And that's a good example too, because in basketball, you're stationary, the basket's stationary.
Yeah, a foul shot's very much like a putt.
You could do foul shots with your eyes closed all day long.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.
So, there's a number of amazing stories of kind of, I don't know what to call them other than superhuman feats.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of fits into the whole sports psychology arena because somebody needs to explain how in the world that's possible. And I guess the most famous, maybe there's something more famous, but one of the most famous stories is John Landy's run when he falls, and then he runs at a pace that I don't know if it has ever been broken, but we actually queued up that video. And so do you want to take a look at that video?
Yeah, definitely.
The goal is for people maybe haven't seen this, but I want to you to explain what's happening, just
right
in the story, what's happening.
Yeah.
And because most of our audience is too young to know the story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But their grandfathers knew this story.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone in the world knew the story.
Oh, yeah.
But then I'd love for you to, after it's over, to explain how in the world is this possible?
Right.
So let's just go. Kev, can you hit it?
Hogan's a real champion, but the crowd of 20,000 is much more interested in the mile and the world's greatest miler, John Landy.
And the hope here was that John Landy was going to break the world record in the mile.
World record on the mile.
He's quickly going up to fifth. Morgan Morris of Victoria is the early leader from Clark, Victoria, and Henderson, New South Wales. Plummer is making up.
And there's a teammate in here, Ron Clark.
Is running easily just behind the leaders.
And this is when? 1930 something?
No, this is 50s.
50s?
And it's on the old cinder
Yeah,
tracks.
50s, because he's still alive, I think.
This is the old cinder track.
Oh, here it is. So pause, Kevin. So what happened here?
So what happens is, first of all, there were 3 men in the world vying for the 4-minute mile. John Landy was one of them. Roger Bannister was the first to break it. I think it was a month later, John Landy actually breaks Bannister's world record. So every time these guys run the mile, there's an expectation. So this was, I think, their national championships.
So this is before or after the 4-minute mile broke?
This is after.
This is after, okay.
And but everybody is looking for him to break the world record again. And the place, you can see by the fans in the back, not only are the stands completely full, but there were like knolls and hills behind this, and they were covered with people.
This was a big deal back then. I mean, I think everybody...
Huge.
Yeah, and it's something that we don't pay attention to running like they used
not
to.
like it used to. I mean, the big sports actually were track and field and crew. Boys on the Boat. You know,
right, Boys on the Boat. Great movie and book, by the way.
Oh, awesome.
But just so people understand, breaking the 4-minute mile was the biggest event in probably sports history.
Well, people thought it was impossible. They thought a human being would actually die if they crossed the 4-minute barrier. Like they didn't think a human being could actually do it, right? And so John Landy here is running. And by the way, the reason I point out that this is a cinder track, for those, I mean, nobody knows what a cinder track is, but there were no rubber tracks. Like they were cinder tracks made of kind of a cinder, like an ash that, dirt, that's kind of combined.
Dirt, right.
And the spikes you would wear were like 1-inch spikes.
So it's sticking in there like it's...
These were huge spikes.
So that's slowing you down.
Well, it was faster than running with flats on because they did grab the ground. But you're right, like an inch into the ground is a lot.
Right.
But again, it's cinders, so the track gives also a lot when you're running. But Ron Clark there.
So which one's Landy? Do you know?
Landy is 112.
112. Okay, this guy here on the outside. Okay.
And so what happened is, if you see the guy here in front, the white shirt, Ron Clark, who's now on the ground, caught his heel, and he falls, as you can see.
Right.
Maybe I don't know if they caught it with him actually going over, but John Landy, you can see the lead leg is up, he's about to go, he's going to have to jump over Ron Clark. But as he jumps over him, his spikes catch Ron Clark's shoulder.
Oh, I didn't understand that.
Yes. And so...
And he felt it, like John knew that happened.
Yeah.
Probably.
Now, I'm not sure, does this video show him coming back?
Well, so I tried to find where they just have the still picture of the fall. I don't know if it was actually caught,
It
like
probably was just the way the filming was at the time, right?
Right. I think they missed that turn.
So here's what happened. So John Landy has to hurdle over Ron Clark, who's fallen. John Landy knows that his spikes caught the shoulder of Ron Clark. And so Ron Clark's on the ground. Everybody else charges on to finish the race. And John Landy runs, his just momentum carries him about 10 yards, but he stops.
And that'll show Kevin hit play.
Landy ran on a few strides and then came back to help his fallen
So what it'll show right here.
magnificent gesture of sportsmanship.
Hang on. Right there. Stop.
Yes.
Off the track slightly.
So he came back. Right there, you're seeing he came back.
He actually stopped and came back to make sure he was okay.
So that's like killing 20 yards or so. Actually, so he went 10 yards, probably came 10 yards back.
Yeah. And just
and
the
then
time.
10 yards again. That's
and the momentum of stopping. You're in the middle of a race, your lactic acid's already built up a little bit. It's a big deal to stop yourself completely.
So he came back. Why? I think that's kind of an interesting point.
Because he was a virtuous man. And what was more important to him was his teammate as opposed to his record.
And do you think that was just do you think he was processing this, or it was just instantaneous?
I think this was who he was.
Virtue's a habit.
That's exactly right. You're Aristotle.
Yeah.
So this is it was not just an act, it was a habit that he developed over his whole life. And so his first response was to care more about the person than about himself for the record. And by the way, the place is going crazy.
Yeah.
The entire, I forget how many people were there that day. It was a huge crowd. I think it was well over 25,000 people, and they're chanting on every stride, Landy, Landy, Landy.
Now, so he helps him. Now, here's a technical question when I watched this.
Yeah.
When he stepped out of bounds, was that a foul or whatever you call it? Because he did go out of bounds just there.
It could be. I mean,
so he might have been disqualified by that.
he could have been.
Which would have been a great injustice.
It would have been. So I think,
they might have waived that.
I think also it didn't serve any... he didn't gain an advantage by doing it, right? So I think that would probably factor into it. If he was in the front of the race or in the race and he did it, that would be a different story.
Okay. So he comes back now. If we can look here.
Now let me just say, if they pick this up, what you're going to see is the speed that he runs down this straightaway is phenomenal.
That's the superhuman thing I want to talk about. Because look at the gap. Now he's going. The other guys are still full steam ahead. He's starting all over. Right. What's the distance there between him
to the front guy is at least 15 to 20 yards, I'd say.
It looks more than that to me. I mean, at least 20 yards.
Well, he's at the 120. They're just about coming up to the 100. So it's, I'll say 20 yards.
Okay. What's the likelihood in a race like this, even with them running full steam, if he wasn't having to start all over, gaining 20 yards at this point in the race is
not normal.
And then starting from scratch.
That's what I mean. So
now he's starting from scratch. That's even more
to gain momentum again and to get moving again. Yeah, I mean it's
so he has to, for him to win, he has to run at a pace of what? Like something far beyond what people at the time were able to do for the 4-minute mile, right?
Right. I mean, well, I'm probably cutting to the end here a little bit, but it's estimated, and people are estimating. And if they had it on the film, the whole thing, they probably could have timed it. But they're estimating that took anywhere from 7 to 15 seconds. There's been different opinions about it, but even take 7 seconds. He ends up running a 4:04, I think it was, mile here, or 4:02, 4:02 or 4:04.
We'll see. Yeah.
And the point is, if you subtracted the time it took him to stop, go back, and restart, he would have broke the world record.
Yeah. Let's finish it, Kev, and you can just kind of talk to us about it.
Look at this, though. I mean, look at
the gap.
But
the gap's huge.
Look at the acceleration.
Plummer's gone to the front now with Henderson coming at him, and Landy still 20 yards behind him, but gaining with every stride.
And he just turns like another level here.
He does.
You can see
Look
him
at this.
there on the outside.
Such a race. With giant strides, the world champion races past Henderson and puts in a paralyzing burst.
Right here.
That was the next lap.
Wow.
That's
This,
where he
this
fell
is down
over.
the final straightaway,
Look at that.
and he's going to win by.
Look at that.
Yeah.
That is, and he doesn't just win.
He kills it.
kills
Yeah.
it.
By stepping off the track, but he's still first to the tape and still the champion.
Unbelievable.
And what's amazing, after this was over, his very first reaction after winning
Was to
wasn't
go-
that he won. He went back to the finish line, waiting for Ron Clark to come in to make sure he was okay. And then he was just ready to get off the track, and the whole place is just going crazy.
Yeah.
They're chanting Landy, and they're asking him to really take a victory lap. And he's a humble guy, and he doesn't want to do it, but they just won't stop.
Yeah.
So like he take kind of like this victory lap. But I've often said, it's playing a little bit here, but I think it's the greatest mile ever run, because
Oh, yeah.
given the circumstance of what he did, it's really remarkable. I mean, the only thing comparable to this was Eric Little in a race leading up to the Olympic Games. He was in a race where he got knocked down, and this is the 400 meters.
I've
He
seen
got
this one
one
too.
lap. It's in Chariots of Fire. They show it, but the actual situation was he was knocked to the ground hard. Everybody's gone. I mean, they're more than 20 yards away from him because they're all sprinting. This is like one lap, and he gets up and just it's like a sight to see. But to your point, the circumstance almost brings you outside yourself.
Well, that's what I'm asking is like, I think people want to know that story of Little and then also this one here. How'd he do it? Because if Little had not fallen, or if Landy had not turned back,
Right.
he wouldn't have run that fast, right?
Probably not. Yeah.
So is that adrenaline?
Well, sure. I mean, you could say there's some adrenaline flowing and so forth, right? But I think it's more than that. I'll give you a more dramatic one, because everybody could argue and say, well, he is a world-class runner, so he can run pretty fast already. So is it really that big a deal? There's a boy by the name of Jeremy Schill. He was 9 years old at the time, and he weighed 65 pounds. His father's in the garage working on their Ford LTD, I think estimated to weigh like 4,000 pounds. And car's up on 4 jacks. His dad's underneath it working on the transmission. And as he's trying to loosen something, a bolt or something, the car starts to gain a little bit of movement and momentum, and the front end of the car falls off the jacks onto his father's chest. Jeremy Schill,
How old is he?
9 years old.
9 years old, yeah.
Weighs 65 pounds, goes over to the front of the car and lifts it up enough so his father can breathe.
All right, so the front of the car would have weighed a couple thousand pounds.
Yeah. And there's nobody in the world that can lift that.
And you have a PhD in human movement or something.
Yeah, an ADD, but yeah.
How's that possible?
Well, here's the point. It's the opposite. It's completely possible. We just don't usually do it. So in other words, he didn't do something you're not capable of doing. He did something we were capable of doing. But we don't tap into that. So then when we do see it, we think that doesn't seem possible. Like, that must be-
Physiologically, can you explain it a little bit?
Well, yes. I mean, you could scientifically say that human beings, we kind of have, as a safety mechanism, our muscles usually send signals to us, so that they don't just rip off our bones. In other words, we can generate so much force and then no more. In cases like this, though, we are tapping into probably the full 100% that the muscles are actually capable of doing, possibly risking injury, but nonetheless, you're capable of doing it. And so I've always said about Jeremy Schill is there's world record strongmen, everything that can't lift that weight.
Yeah, the deadlifting is, I don't know what the deadlift record is, but it's like 1,000 pounds or something.
It's over 1,000, but it's not over 2,000.
It's not over 2,000,
Yeah.
and they're not 9 years old.
And and 65 pounds.
Right.
So he never lifted a weight.
350-pound guys lifting 1,000 pounds.
And even
something like
400-pound guys
400 pounds,
sometimes, right? Yeah. But here he is. He's never lifted a weight in his life. He's not taking human growth hormone or steroids or anything else. And he goes and does this. My point is, it's a point to say human beings are capable of so much more. So it's not a question of like, is this some kind of freak thing that happened? And in a way you say, well, yeah, because it's so unusual, but it's actually, why aren't we doing it more often? Or why aren't we closer to it more often? And it's because we don't know how to tap into that. And it's usually the circumstance that brings that out in us, because one, you can imagine John Landy in that situation, Eric Little in his situation, Jeremy Schill, the situation itself, there's no thought. There's no consciousness in the sense of, well, I'm going to go over here and lift up the front of this 2,000-pound car. I mean, you just do it, and you're capable of doing it, and it happens. And when we see that, it stands out for us because it's just so unusual.
If biologists or what other kind of medical professionals could analyze that kid picking which is a more dramatic story than Landy
than even
running,
that, right? Yeah.
Would they be able to prove physiologically that this can happen? Or, I mean, would they be able to write a dissertation on how this physiologically happened with the muscles and the tendons and the bone? Like, how does his bones not snap? I mean, such a little guy picking up something. I just wonder, or do other people hear that and say, no, that's a myth, that's a legend, that didn't happen?
No, it does. It does. As a matter of fact, it's happened enough that it's not
really debated.
Yeah. I mean, you can't say, no, nobody's ever done that. I mean, there's another situation of she was an athlete, a college athlete. She was home. Her dad was doing something, again.
A car.
The lesson here is don't get under cars.
Yeah, right.
Unless you got those pits to get under. But this car falls on her dad, and she runs over to the back rear well of the car and just lifts it up and throws it off her dad. And his heart's now stopped, and she's got to do CPR on him, and he's saved. But my point is, that's like the bionic, man or woman kind of thing. Like, we're thinking it has to be bionics or something has to happen to have that kind of strength. But it's just telling you that we're capable of so much more than we tap into. I mean, there's no way of proving this, but you hear people talking about the mind itself and saying, we only use a small percentage of actually the capacity of our brain to activate our bodies in ways that it could be.
So we're only using part of our muscles as well. Is that what
in a way?
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And obviously athletes train to use them more.
So so as a sports psychologist, are you able to help people kind of tap into that just a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we talked about the focus piece. So the more absorbed you are, think about all those people. Right. They're absorbed in the present moment. They're not distracted. They're not worried about what it means. They're not thinking what people are going to think about them. They're not worried or thinking, hey, I'm going to win, or they're not caught up in any of it. They're caught up in the doing.
And somehow all of those distractions decrease the human strength a little bit.
Absolutely,
a little bit.
The performance, every distraction in your life is going to take away from what you're doing. Whether it's athletics or anything else for that matter.
I know in martial arts training, I remember our instructors, giving the example of if a pencil, and we've all experienced this, I know I have, we're having a conversation, if a pencil starts to roll off the table, you just
exactly.
grab it
out of the air.
Lightning.
Yeah.
And then they're like, that's really how you become, at least in fighting, that those instantaneous reflexes that almost become second nature because you're not processing anything.
But it was more than the reflex. So, for example, it was his peripheral vision that saw the pencil rolling.
Right.
And then, believe it or not, it was the shift from his peripheral vision to his focused vision, and that he's fast enough to actually move and precise enough to be able to put his fingers around the actual pencil.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a whole host of things that happen for that to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've done that. I mean, I've cut things fall. I mean,
sure.
I'm sure you've done.
Yeah.
This is the point. We've all had peak performances. Everybody has peak performance. And sometimes we don't attribute it as a peak performance because it could seem silly. Like I often give the example, I roll up a little ball of a napkin and I throw it across the kitchen counter and it lands in a little fruit glass.
Right.
In your head, you're first like, hey, that was pretty cool, right? That happened. Point is, sometimes you're like me. If you're foolish enough, you go, you get it. Well, let me do that again, and then you're throwing this thing for and it's not going in. So part of it is it was capable of going in. You put it in the first time. So now why are you not putting it in every single time you go? It's because you don't know how you did it the first time. And then you haven't mastered doing that.
All right. So we're in the kitchen one day and my son, Peter, who is at Belmont, Abbey, he's, I guess, 19 or so. He's always been the class clown, very funny guy.
Yeah.
And this is probably 3 or 4 years ago. So he's 15, 16, something like that. But there's a fly flying around us, and it's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And it comes near him, and he's being goofy, and so he goes like, "Whoa!" He does this little kung fu thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, whoop, and he hits it, and then the fly, and everybody looks at each other like,
Right.
"Oh my gosh!"
Right. See, that
it's like,
stands out, right?
There's no way he could do it again if he tried.
Right.
Oh, I
But-
say that, but I probably shouldn't
But
say
he
that.
could. Like, that's the point, right? Is that, think about when he was doing it. I often talk about children at play. If you ever watch a child playing,
Yeah.
Mary, some.
Oh, I have. I got
Well,
plenty.
I know that, but my point, Mary and I used to describe it as seriously sifting sand, because they're like so absorbed in whatever this thing is they're doing. So when we go back to that detail thing,
Yeah.
they're like in another world, like of absorption, right? So in a way, as an adult, your downside is that you've learned how to not do that anymore. You've kind of undone that. You don't seriously sift sand anymore, which makes it hard for you to focus.
I've talked about like when you go on walks with little kids, they don't walk on a straight line. They're just like bounce around. They're
Yeah.
like just jumping all over the place and just experiencing nature and the world, and they're picking up little things.
Well, they're seeing
and
details.
they're seeing
Picture
details.
your real little ones. You got to worry what they're going to put in their mouth, because
Yeah.
they're finding like specks on the floor
It's
that you
amazing.
didn't even know were there.
Yeah, if
And
there's
they
one little
find they're
thing.
looking at it, it's going to go in their mouth.
Exactly.
They're like, okay, what do you got there?
I know it's incredible. They will find the one thing,
Yeah.
and it's because they're not sitting around thinking about balance sheets and cash flows and stuff. Like
Right.
they're just
Yeah.
exploring the world beneath them.
Yeah.
You know, and
Or they don't take everything for granted.
Hmm.
Like they're appreciating everything to its fullest.
yeah,
So they actually could find joy in a leaf.
yeah.
We're like, okay, it's a leaf. Like, what else you got? Let's move on.
So, kind of these superhuman events, for lack of a better, but it's not super. That's your point.
No,
is it's not
they're human.
superhuman,
They're
but
human
these
events.
Peak performances.
Yes. Yeah.
There was another one that we queued up. I'm forgetting the guy's name. His name is Lenny.
Oh,
Lenny
yeah.
Skutnik.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a cool story. You want to tell that story? Because this kind of factors into that category of somebody did something quite remarkable.
Yes,
But it always, everything you talk about ties back into virtue.
it does.
That's what you do.
Well, it ties back to God.
Right. So tell us that story and how that all fits together.
Well, it's kind of an amazing story. If I don't know how how old everybody's watching, but if anybody can remember back, there was actually a plane crash. I think it was Air Florida Flight 90. Took off from Reagan. It was a blizzard, and almost immediately after it took off, it went down and hit the 14th Street Bridge, glanced the 14th Street Bridge, and went into the Potomac River, which was covered in ice.
Nice.
And it's a blizzard. I mean, nobody can even get around. So to get emergency or anybody else there, it's just not coming. And so a lot of people died, but I think it's 10 people managed to get out the back of the plane. And they're in 30-degree water. The plane broke up the ice, but they're like in the midst of ice and so forth. And there was a ranger, forest ranger or something, helicopter, not designed at all to do this, but they got a rope. They lowered it down from the helicopter, and they would get it to people that were kind of on the sort of towards the back of the plane, enough that they could put it around themselves, and then the helicopter would drag them to the shore.
Right.
So they end up getting 9 of the people.
Yeah.
And there's this one woman left. Tirado was her last name. It might have been Linda Tirado. She's in the water, and she's been blinded by the jet fuel. And it is the most pitiful sight. I think we're probably going to show
Kevin,
it.
yeah, you can.
She's in the water, and she's freezing. And she can't see, but she starts to move her hands, like she has an instinct to try to move to survive, and her face is just, and she goes under, and then her face just comes back up. She is going to die.
That is on here, Kevin. If you rewind a little, can you put on the cursor on there and see if you can see when she's like on? Go back a little bit more, right there. Go a little bit more.
Yeah, go back. That's when she's still on the ice. Go
Right.
back. She's in the water. Keep going.
Here's where, right there, Bill, is where she's. Okay, just start
Maybe right after that.
right here,
Maybe
right
right here.
here, and then we'll see her kind of flailing, and that's kind of not quite here. 1 second. Here.
No, it was before this. There's a scene before this where she's actually out in the water. She's
In
not
the
even,
water, yeah.
She's not even on the ice yet.
But I remember that scene where she's flailing and it's like, what's she doing? Well, she's blind. She doesn't know where she is.
She doesn't, and she's frozen and in shock and everything else. So,
right. Well, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to find it, but the point, that's him at the end getting her.
So let's go back, Kevin, to the current spot where Lenny Skutnik shows up.
Here's what's amazing, right? At this point, there's still not rescuers there, but people. The plane has crashed, so people are gathering along the bridge and along the shore, but the ice goes out there. They can't get out to her. There's no way to get there. So even at some point, I think some fire rescuers came or emergency people came, and they tried to get out, but they would break through the ice. Like they just couldn't get out over the ice to her. And I'm telling you, like if you watch the whole video, because you'll find that spot that we're talking about. Literally, her head goes under her face. Just her face comes up under the water, and she's like this. You can just see it. Next time she goes under that, she's going to die. She's done. This guy, Lenny Skutnik, is coming from work when he sees all of this. He walks down the shore, and he sees her out there flailing, and he says on the back of his neck, like his hair stood up, and he said, "She's going to die." And without a thought this is again back to the kind of focus almost, right? He didn't think about what it meant or anything else. He strips off his jacket, his coat, his shoes.
You can hit play there, Kev.
Lenny realizes he can watch no more. It was just too much to take. I absolutely
Right there.
That's where she's going down.
Yeah.
I didn't go in and get her.
That's the part you're talking about. And here he goes. Just takes his jacket off, takes his shirt off. Boom, and you can see him splash in there. That was him.
Yeah.
And he just swims out there.
To safety.
He just grabs her. Now this water's cold.
Oh, it's 30 degrees. You could go into shock just being in that water.
I didn't weigh it or think about it. I just did it.
There it is. I didn't weigh it or think about it. I just did it. Yeah. That was it, Kev. Thank you.
And if you want to know something about him, right, you might think, well, was that just this one unique situation? So he almost had instant hypothermia. So as soon as he came out of the water, they brought him to an ambulance.
Right.
When he got in the ambulance, one of the victims, I think had like 2 broken ankles and they were freezing. He takes off his coat that they had given him and puts it on that person. And he's freezing. He's got hypothermia.
Yeah.
So this is the way this guy thinks. And it's like when I say thinks, this is the way this guy lives.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who's like a mail clerk coming home from work who just sees this. But here's my point. There were 200 people there. He was the only one that felt compelled, even at risk of his own life, to dive into that water.
Isn't bystander effect a real thing?
It is.
Like people just stare and don't do something.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that happens with some serious things.
Yeah. Some very serious things.
Yeah.
But it takes a certain
because everybody thinks somebody else will do something about it. So it kind of removes your personal responsibility, it seems. But it never does.
So one of the major probably the biggest theological point that kind of penetrates your life and your understanding of everything from sports psychology to business to everything, and it just permeates your book and your life as our discussions, is this notion of divine providence. Like you even cite trustful surrender multiple times in the book. Somehow that's tied in with your notion of living in the present moment.
Yes.
Like it all kind of comes together. I'm not pretending I can articulate it.
Yeah.
But in seeing this guy who's not thinking, he's just living, there's a selflessness. We see John Landy, selflessness in the moment, not thinking about the crowd, not thinking about his time. Relate all of that to the more theological or spiritual point of divine providence and present moment. You know how to talk about that subject really well. So relate it all to everything we've been discussing.
Well, I mean, I wish I was a philosopher like you. You have a degree of philosophy. But I try to be logical. I try to think, I often say God really has made us for 2 things. I mean, he's made us for himself, right? But there's 2 things as human beings that we desire most. And it's actually the only 2 things we really want. And that is objective truth and authentic love. Because that's God. God is truth, God is love. We're made for it. It's what we want. So no matter how else we're living our lives, whatever the details are, whatever else we go about, whatever goods may come into our lives, we want those two things. So I'm just trying to be logical in that means my very existence, your existence, everybody who's listening to us today or watching, their existence starts off with asking the first question: does God exist or not? It's the first question everybody should ask themselves if they haven't already, because it determines the rest of your life and what you do and a certain logic in terms of the way that you'll live it. It's interesting that if you surveyed the whole world, probably 98% of the world or more believe in a higher being, at least. We might differ in how we understand the higher being, right? But everybody has a sense that there's a higher being, which is kind of interesting. And by the way, through all of time, man has had a sense of something beyond himself. So it's not a proof of God, although St. Thomas Aquinas is wonderful in that, I always say St. Thomas Aquinas brings you to the precipice. He uses reason to literally bring you to the edge where your reason almost gets you there. Now, you could argue that, well, faith is that final leap off the precipice, but that leap isn't a blind leap in a sense. Your reason has taken you all the way there. So my point is, I believe God does exist. And so if God exists, there's a whole line of logic and reason in terms of then how we think, feel, what we do, why we do it. So sport, how is sport any different than anything else in life? It's just some other thing that human beings do. And then what should be the foundation and basis of it? Well, it should start off with, if God exists, then that should somehow be at the core foundation of my understanding of this thing that we're going to call sport. Yeah. It's not the only thing, and that's sometimes the problem in sport, is that we'll see people after a game kneel down and, in a circle, hold hands and pray, and that's great. But if during the game I'm cursing at you or trying to take out your knee or I'm angry at you or whatever it might be, there's a little disconnect there for me. So the point being, how, again, we're whole people, body, mind, and souls, that are doing these things all at that instant of a moment. What does that mean? So when I talk about divine providence, it's not some kind of punting, no pun intended, to get us away from sport. It's to say it's the essence of sport. I mean, we were made to play. I find that fascinating.
All right, talk about play. You have a whole kind of theory on play.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Because you think of play as just like little kids running around, but what is play?
Well, God made us to play. It's quite remarkable. From the beginning of time, you go back to the earliest man, people have played. And what's interesting is in earlier man, play and religion were very closely aligned. There were a lot of rituals and things that were very similar to play. But you could ask, what is play? Play, when it's done as it ought to be, not for some purpose, like meaning I'm doing it to make money, or I'm doing it for to get a clap on the back or whatever trophy. Play for its own sake is very much like wisdom. We're called to it. Wisdom's in Proverbs says, "I played before God. God was my delight. I played before God day after day." This thing called play is something we've actually been made for. If you look at philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all had something to say about play and about sport. And to not confuse the two, people think that sport and play are two different things. Sport is the competitive form of play. There's different kinds of play. There's risk-related things. There's roller coasters. Those are all considered forms of play, but sport is the competitive form of play. So winning and losing, by the way, makes a difference. The idea that we can do sport and it really doesn't count whether we win or lose, then that's not sport. That's something else. So the competitive part of the game is actually an important part. It's the essence of that competitive form of play. So we're made to play. So what does that mean? Again, look at Scripture. St. Paul refers to it in 1 Corinthians. He talks about, running the race, the boxing. He gives different analogies. Why was he doing that? Because Paul was from Tarsus. And in Tarsus was a palestra. And in those days, that would have been called, in our days, an Olympic training center. So he knew all the people listening to him would completely understand. Isn't that a non-surprising thing? We could say the same thing today. Sport is a powerful means for communicating the purpose of life of each person in relationship with God. I mean, it's a powerful purpose if it's used properly, if it's directed properly.
Do you remember how Aristotle said, and I think Father Shaw wrote about this.
He was great.
Yeah, but he said that when we watch as spectators, when we watch sports and we kind of get lost in that moment.
Yes.
That's actually the highest, like that's as close as most people get to contemplation.
That's right. Isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I wrote about it in my Aristotle book about, watching one of the World Series where there was this incredible situation and my kid, Aiden, who's now 23, but when he was a little boy, and we're on pins and needles, it's a midnight.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, extra innings in the World Series. And you could hear a pen drop, time stand still, all those kind of things we say.
Right.
We're sitting here staring and I'm looking at him. I pull myself out of the moment enough to look at him and he's just locked in.
Yeah.
And then when a home run is hit and the guy runs around and they win the World Series, it was the Cardinals. When that happens, you see the way this little boy lit up, and I see what Aristotle was talking about.
Right.
It was as close to contemplation of a higher good than most people would never.
So the problem is not play or sport, and I think in today's world we tend to think the problem is sport. Sport is bad. It's like, no, play and sport were made for how we do it, how we conduct it. And by the way, we're big in today's world of changing the meaning of words.
Yeah.
So when we say pro football player plays, he's a pro football player and he plays football, could be argued. He's actually an employee. I mean, he actually works for a living, and his living is actually doing this thing on a field, moving a ball up and down the field. I mean,
yeah.
So it can lose it. And by the way, that's why many players struggle, because they actually stop playing. So even if they're paying you, you gotta almost pretend you're not being paid. You gotta just go back to the essence of why you did it to begin with and the joy you had in doing it, and that contemplation.
Meaning it's an end in itself versus a utility to another end of
That's
making
right.
money.
Yeah.
Now, what about, I don't know why this came to my mind now, but we've talked a little bit in the past about this craze, this obsession with families in the last 20 years, 30 years, more than any time in history, of really young kids getting in highly competitive sports. I'll never forget, I was going on a run one morning with a group of guys doing F3.
Yeah.
And we're running, and this guy's telling me about his daughter's, training regimen. And she has soccer practice, but then she also has agility training every day. And she was going to a soccer training camp in the summer. And he's going through all of this. And I'm like, well, where's your daughter in high school? Because I was like, I thought she was going to be trying to get into college. Oh, no, she's 9. Right. And I'm like, what? But people do this, Bill.
Absolutely.
Right? And so talk about that. I mean, is that, A, is it healthy? And B, is it even necessary? Because don't a lot of these things wash out in the end?
Yes.
And like, if you start playing as a teenager, you're going to make up,
right,
like John Landy there. You're going to circle the track and catch up to everybody very, very quickly. Talk about that, because kids get real obsessive, or parents get obsessive really young.
Right. Well, now we could get really deep and say, first, you almost need to address marriage and the family. Because if marriage and the family is off in any way, everything built on top of it's going to be off in some way. So sport in particular, I think what starts to happen is parents are either seeing it as a way for their child to get a scholarship to college, or they just want to see them be a superstar, in some way. And so you hear the phrase, living vicariously through your children.
I've seen it, man. We lived a lot of years on the Little League baseball field.
I think you see it a lot in Little League baseball.
Oh, my gosh. And Dad's standing back there behind the stop and yelling.
It's a slow game, and so you have tons of time for people to be yelling things out.
But you know what I've noticed? It's actually the dads that were never very good athletes themselves that are the loudest.
Right.
The ones who are really good are chill.
Right.
That shows us that the insecurity is just apparent.
Or you've had your experience, it was a good one, and now you can let somebody else have theirs. It doesn't have to be about you in some ways. But again, we're in a culture today where then we're led to believe that, well, if my child has this maybe talent for this, I'm obligated as a parent, aren't I, to do everything I can, to tap that out. And they're doing that with no understanding of physiology or anything else. So to your point, every pro football player I've worked with is a unique human being made by God. Like, you are not getting into the NFL if you are not a unique human being. Kyle Brady, who I worked with, tight end, he was drafted in the first round, number 9, I think, went to the Jets, then he was with Jaguars, and then finished his career last year in New England in the Super Bowl. Kyle was 6'7", 285, had like a 35-inch waist, could run a 4.5 40. I mean, his neck connected to his shoulders. He was like, to your point earlier, almost felt like inhumanly strong. Like, I mean, he just was incredibly strong guy. If you saw Kyle, you just would have to look and say, wow, this is like God doing a work of art here. Right. I mean, this is, God made this one unique human being. And that's like what you see. So I'm 6'8". Like, there's only so many 6'8" people. I don't take any credit for it, By
the way, I went to with some guys here from the office. We went to a Packers and Lions game. We went to the Lambeau Field.
Oh wow!
Which is an experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah.
And we got passes, and we went down onto the field.
Oh wow!
In the warm-ups.
Oh wow!
So I'm 10 feet away from the Lions' offensive line as they were warming up.
Yeah.
Bill, I felt like a Smurf, man.
Right. No,
they're huge.
Well, the
TV does not do it justice.
Their biceps are your thigh.
I was blown away. Like, I've watched football my whole life.
Yeah, TV doesn't do
Bill,
justice.
I had no idea how big they are.
Yeah, huge. And by the way, they're not just huge, they're incredibly strong.
They're fast. These big, huge guys are fast.
That's what I don't know that's fully appreciated. I mean, when we see a hard hit in football, everybody's like, ooh, you see that? These guys, I mean, the size of them and the speed they're moving at and how hard they're hitting each other, these guys go to the locker room. I mean, they got black and blues on their body like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, the smallest guy out there, of course, was the field goal kicker.
And he's big.
And he was my size.
Exactly.
He's my size.
Yeah.
I'm 6'2",
right.
200 pounds.
Well, people think quarterbacks are small. And even the guys who you think are small
are still
big guys.
Big guys.
Like, they're really big and strong, So all I'm getting at is...
And the kicker on TV looks like this little shrimp.
And he's...
And he's my size. Yeah. And I'm not a little guy.
No. That's what I'm saying. That guy could be 6'2", 220.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And so you could start somebody off at 5 years old. I mean, it'd be like if my parents wanted me to be a jockey, and I went to jockey school, and
Billy O. Thierfelder,
running the derby. Yeah.
Your feet would be
my feet are dragging in the dust, as we go. But that's my kind of point, though.
I gotta hire an artist to draw that picture. I'm gonna give that to you one day.
But you get my point, though, right? So, sport is somewhat arbitrary. Isn't it interesting that we've decided on what a sport is? I mean, think about golf, right? Who made this up? You cut holes in grass and then you have sticks that you hit like a little white ball into a hole. It's a made up thing, right? Yeah. But I could, if I said tomorrow, tiddlywinks exist, but if I said tomorrow, tiddlywinks is going to be $1 billion sport. There'd be people trying tiddlywinks right now that never tried it before. Yeah. And there's going to be some human being right now who is the absolute best tiddlywinks player in the whole world. Yeah. But you're not going to know it because nobody, who cares if you can do tiddlywinks, right? Yeah. But that's my point about sport. It's just that we arbitrarily have identified certain things that we call a sport, and then it takes on an oversized importance and value about money and power and fame and everything else that goes with it. So now it's really, really important. And so now football, as if football always existed from the beginning of time, and it's football. Somebody made it up.
How would you've seen the way professional sports have gone and college sports. You've been, Belmont Abbey is the 7th largest athletic program in the
United States.
In the United States.
Yeah.
How would you change sports if you were emperor of athletics?
I would start off by addressing the whole person. I mean, I would not make it. See, maybe this is the point to make. Everybody's concerned about the winning. And they'll even say we need to sacrifice all the other stuff in order to win. Because winning, I should really say what the bottom line is money. And if we're talking about college, now Division 2 and 3 get thrown to this category of Division 1. They're not making money.
They don't make money.
They're losing money, right? But it's all about money. That's what drives media. That's what drives products, that materials, I mean, betting, I mean, all of these things are driven by money. So it's about money. So it would appear to people that none of the other stuff counts. All that counts is, did you win, which means did you make money? And not realizing that I would make the argument that if I took two world-class athletes and if somehow they could be of identical ability, physical ability, I would argue that the one who exercised and lived a life of virtue is going to outperform on the field the one who lives a life of vice. Because all of the virtues would be at hand. You would better utilize all the skills, talents, and abilities you actually have.
Are you saying that virtue is a better motivator than vice? So they get
No,
out there
I'm
and
saying it's real. It's not an outside like, hey, look at this fuzzy thing to make you smile. It's in us. In other words, virtues, God, through the grace of God, virtue is in us. Now there's natural virtues, right? And then there's supernatural virtues and there's infused virtues. But virtue is actual real. Virtue is a word. So when we say the virtue of fortitude, courage, that's describing something. There's no such thing as a fortitude that I could hold up right here and say, oh, here's a fortitude.
Right.
Virtue is describing what we actually do. So what is in you?
Yeah, there's no 10 pounds of fortitude.
That's it. That's
right.
exactly. I can't show you a pile of fortitude over there.
Right.
And so that then comes down to like, well, what's in you? And if those things that we call virtues that actually are part of your will, that drive you to do the things you do in the way you do them, and you're doing them in the best possible way, and you're doing it selflessly because, and this is a hard thing, I didn't have this when I was competing, you're doing this because you truly do want to glorify God. Like the parable of the talents, you want to double the talents that God gave you. And that should be our first and foremost motivation. Now, here's my argument. If we did that, we would actually have better performance today in every single sport there is than we do right now.
Let's take one example. Let's say a wide receiver. I know you've worked with wide receivers.
Yeah.
And you've talked about getting their mind straight around catching the ball.
Right.
The thank you, Jesus story.
Yes.
Tie that into how in the world would that man in his life, living a virtuous life, actually make him catch that ball better?
Well, think about, you take everything with you. So, you could say, well, when I step on the field, I leave everything behind. To a point, right? But I mean, if, for example, you're having a fight with your wife or you're having some problem with your children and so forth, you can say that that's going to have no impact on you at all, and that you're going to just be the purest like athlete who's just now going to go and like do everything, just in some perfect way. You're affected by that. It probably affected the way you trained. It probably affected the way that you moved. It probably affected just your peace of mind. It affected your ability to focus in detail on things. So
they always Super Bowl or any championship game, they're always showing these human situation stories where the quarterback lost his grandfather. I think that was Mahomes' situation.
Right.
But they're always going to tell you about these behind the scenes stories because they're questioning whether it's going to affect their game.
Right.
Because I think we all know it obviously does.
And it could in a very positive way. But that's what I'm trying to get at. And that's just like a small sliver, of an example. But I'm saying that if you look at the virtues, if we're saying that virtue is a value to living a good life, why wouldn't it be a real value to you in executing like your skills as a laborer, like if you're a carpenter, or if you're a football player in the NFL and the Super Bowl? I mean,
yeah, I think the average person listening to this would say, okay, living a virtuous life, how does it help me catch a football better if I'm on the field? Like, I'm still not getting
because it'd be like saying, well, how did weightlifting help me when I played on the football field? Because,
okay, I see what you're saying. So
because you actually have strength,
right?
That you got.
So
you actually have something in you. And you could look at virtue like a muscle in some way. Maybe that's a bad analogy. But a virtue,
like a person is more peaceful, they're more serene, they're more focused perhaps because
they're more sacrificial. They're more disciplined. So in other words, even the way I train, even the way I approach myself, the way I would treat my teammates, the way I would interact with my head coach,
all that manifests on whether they catch the ball or not.
Right. And what effect am I even having on other teammates? I mean, look, we're clear about the problems that certain athletes bring to a whole team when they act out.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, what about the opposite? What when you have somebody who truly is other focused and loves that person and wants the most for them? Even if they don't identify it as love, they know that there's something special about that person that they want to continue to have a relationship with. That person's usually a leader. and it's going to have an impact on a lot of people. So you go on that field, you could say, well, catching the ball, literally putting my hand on the ball, everything goes into you putting your hand on the ball. Your strength, your speed, your coordination, your visual focus, your will, your desire to even be out there on the field. I mean,
Your mindset.
like all of you is doing anything you're doing in the present moment.
What's the story you always tell about the wide receiver dropping the ball and you got him saying, "Thank you, Jesus"? What's that all about? But anyone who knows Bill knows that like "Thank you, Jesus" is like your thing.
You just say that.
You just say it all the time.
Because it's true. We have the gratitude bell at the Abbey.
I know,
right?
a big gratitude
Did you see
bell.
that, by the way?
Yes.
I sent that out 200 times.
Yes.
Rung.
Yeah. And what was the event though? Because I saw it posted somewhere.
It was this neo-catechumenan way organization, and at the last minute they were coming to Charlotte and didn't have a place to stay, and we let them stay at the Abbey, and they were just so grateful. When they went to leave, they all lined up and they all rang the gratitude bell, and they told me they rang it 200 times.
Amazing.
So, and I have a little video clip of
Yeah.
them, not the whole time them ringing it, but of a lot of people ringing it, and I thought, I love that, because
all right. I rang the bell once, but
you got to go back and ring it again.
here's the thing.
Yeah.
So it was Bob Luddy who was at the campus for the Benedict Leadership Award.
Yes.
So he's the award recipient. We're giving him a little tour.
Yeah.
We get out of the golf cart, and Bob Luddy's 80-something years
Yes.
old. And we go and we're taking a picture next to the bell, and Phil Brock is going to take the picture of us. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to ring the bell," and Bob's standing right next to it,
no.
and I'm saying, and I ring it. I had not rung.
That's loud.
Oh my gosh!
You don't have to ring it as hard as you rang it.
My head was throbbing the rest of the night, and I'm like, we brought this great recipient in
And now he's
to
deaf.
give a speech, and now he's deaf.
But he's grateful.
I deafened
Yeah.
the man right before he gives a big address.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
I had no idea. That sucker is loud.
Well, knowing you didn't hold back on your ringing of the gong, right?
Man, I hit it, man.
You're hitting a home run.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah. Usually everybody just like hits the
Just
clanger
barely,
against the side,
yeah.
right? But it's a regular, it's a gigantic church bell. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a loud bell.
These are the bells that like ring throughout the town.
This is where you call people from 3 miles away.
Right, exactly.
So if you're like
I think it did.
Quasimodo up in the tower,
exactly,
right? But
So
anyway, where were we going here?
I don't remember where we were going.
but the player,
dropping the ball. Thank you, Jesus.
So and anyway, I go out with this one player, and he's a NFL wide receiver. I won't say a name, and I'm throwing him passes. He's running routes, and about the 8th or 9th ball, he drops a ball, and when he drops the ball, he lets out a really bad word. I don't need to say what it is. We've all heard a bad word before. It was
Golly jeepers.
Yeah, not quite. Anyway, he says this, right? And I look at him and I said, "What did you say?" And he kind of looks back at me sheepishly and he goes, "Well, I dropped the ball." I said, "I know you dropped the ball." I said, "But what did you say?" And again, he looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, well, I dropped the ball." I said, "Thank you, Jesus," right? And he kind of gives me this like stark, shocked look, like almost like, "What?" Like it was almost like I hit him over the head with a 2x4, like, "What?" And I said, "Thank you, Jesus." He goes, "Well, why am I thanking Jesus? I dropped the ball." I said, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, be thankful in all things. He was a Christian athlete too. And I said, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, be thankful in all things. Not just all the stuff you want, but in everything, you're supposed to be thankful. He's kind of looking at me like with his eyebrows down, like he's thinking about what I'm saying. And I said, "So thank you, Jesus, right?" And he goes, "Thank you, Jesus." I said, "Good, now come on back." So he comes back and I said to him, "So tell me what happened." Of course, I know he has no idea because he was cursing, kicking the ground. I know he has no idea why he dropped the ball. But I asked him, I said, "What happened?" And he goes, and almost everybody, by the way, you ever ask this of, will almost say the same thing. They'll make something up and then put a question mark at the end of the statement. So they'll say, he said, I didn't get my hands up, and it means he doesn't know.
Right. I took my eye off the ball.
Yeah, like he doesn't know. So he's trying to say, well, what could it have been? And let me give you something because you've just asked me a question. I got to give you something. So I said, no, actually, off your plant, I said, your head swept around. And when you swept your head around, it was too slow and everything blurred and you didn't see the ball soon enough and you didn't see it clearly enough. And that's why it actually hit you in the helmet, which it did. So I showed him and I said, now you're going to think, I don't know if anybody's going to watch this, but if you watch right now, if you do your cut and you turn your head even just like that, everything blurred until my head stopped there, right?
Yeah, right.
But if I do that, I mean, I look like I have a tick,
Right.
but that I just saw a ball 5 yards sooner.
Yeah.
And it stopped my vision, and I could actually focus in detail on the ball coming at me, right?
Right.
So I told him that. So he goes out, he runs some more routes, about, again, maybe 10th ball, whatever it was, he drops it on the ball. And I can see it. He's about to say the word, but he stops himself, and he looks back at me, and I go, yeah. And he goes, thank you, Jesus. I said, good, come on back. So he comes back, and I said, tell me what happened. And he goes, it's exactly what you said. I did it again. He goes, I swept my head around, and he goes, I did not see it. I said, perfect. Now, some people say, well, why don't you tell him, yeah, you got to fix that or you got to do better? Because he knew what he did. You can't change anything without awareness. So the fact that he knew he did that, victory. I mean, it means that he's going to change. It means he's going to get better at this. I said, perfect, exactly what it was. By the end of the day, this guy is making catches that could be on an ESPN highlight reel. I mean, they're unbelievable catches that I had never even seen him making before. And he could be 40 yards away from me, and if he dropped one, I'm now hearing him scream out at the top of his lungs, thank you, Jesus. And my point to this, some people say, well, what was the point of having him say that? Like, he's a wide receiver. He's trying to get better at receiving. There's two reasons for saying thank you, Jesus. The first one is the higher argument. It's the right thing to do. We are called to be thankful in all things, so it's virtuous. It's the right thing to do. Be grateful. The second reason, though, is purely pragmatic and sports performance. This is a world-class athlete. He's a wide receiver in the NFL. If he drops a ball, there's a very specific reason he dropped the ball. But if he's cursing, which is, by the way, ego, which is actually pride. Nobody thinks of that in that way. But the reason you're cursing, kicking the ground, everything else is to show me how upset you are because you don't drop balls. You are so much better than this. So you have to show me that you're upset about this in some way, right? It's about pride. You let that go. The thank you, Jesus, frees you up, gets rid of all that garbage, and lets you reflect on actually what just happened. If you know what happened, you can change. Matter of fact, it's inevitable in anything. Anything you're doing in life. You could be a musician, you could be a carpenter, you could be an athlete. You got to know precisely what you did, and you also got to know precisely what you want. If you know those two things, you will eventually get there.
Is this just like a tremendous antidote to losing your temper in life in general?
Yeah. Well, think about why people lose their temper and get frustrated. They're bereft of ideas. They don't know what else to do. That's why coaches yell at a player, because they're frustrated. It's like, I told you 20 times and you still did that thing, right? Well, part of the problem was that person didn't get it. Just because you said it doesn't mean they got it. Matter of fact, I often say the greatest responsibility is on the person communicating. You're the one who's motivated to communicate the message. If the person doesn't get it, then what good was it? You could say, hey, I said it perfectly. 10 other people will tell you I said it perfectly. It's, well, that's great. Did it help that person? And if it didn't, what good was it? So that's why sometimes you got to be creative and say, I might have to say this 101 different ways until this person clicks. And have you ever seen that? Like you'll tell somebody something, and you'll keep saying it, and you keep trying different ways, and then all of a sudden you'll change your words, or you say it, or you show something a different way, and all of a sudden, boom, light bulb goes off, person has it.
Well, it does take creativity. One thing I tell parents a lot going around talking about parenting, because something I try to do at home, trying to get your kids' attention to pay attention to virtue, especially when there's internal bickering going on in the house, or fighting about who has to do the chores tonight, or whatever. There's always, if you're not careful, the kids will make you be referee all day long. And I hate being the referee at the house, right? Yeah. So, I would start, years ago, I'd try to say, well, this is, it's kind for you to help with this, or it's just that you help because they helped you before. But very quickly, you kind of run out of those things.
Right.
And so for a while, I said, can I have a peacemaker, talking about the Beatitudes? And then they would eventually say, well, it's his turn to be a peacemaker. And like, you've missed the point. So now, for me, like the nuclear bomb to drop on the kids when they're fighting about doing something or whatever. And I'll just say this. I'll say, okay, look, I understand everything you're saying. Can anyone here please volunteer to be a Christian? And it's like,
right.
How are you going to get around that one? You know what I mean?
No.
Right. Like you're asking them, they have to say, okay, right?
Right, yeah.
So because my point is like all the other things, there's little ways to argue about why I don't have to do something virtuous.
Right.
But when I just say, can I please have a volunteer to be a Christian? Does anyone here choose to be a Christian right here, right now?
Right.
And it's very hard for them to argue around that
Sure.
because I've gotten to something so fundamental.
Right.
And I get tremendous response from that. Now, I need to hold up a mirror, and say it to myself.
Right.
But I'm just saying that's my little way of trying to be creative. You have to say things to people in a way that kind of shocks them.
That helps them to come to what you know to be good and true, right?
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
one thing I see in this, what you just said, is a couple things. One is it's like a paradox or enigma of some kind where the only time you will ever truly be happy in life is when you've sacrificed. Now, that is abhorrent to our human nature. My human nature only wants pleasure. Like, I don't want to deal with any kind of pain or suffering or discomfort of any kind at all. And yet, the only time I'm truly going to be happy is when I take on some kind of sacrifice, which means some kind of pain or discomfort of some kind. Ooh, that's a tough lesson to learn, but it's all the other stuff is pleasure that could be momentarily satisfying, and then you are empty. The problem in our world today is that we are so distracted, and it can be filled by so many millions of things happening to us in every minute of the day, social media, whatever you want to pick out, that we don't ever take the time to reflect on why are we not happy. We think we're one step away from happiness. Either I need to buy that thing or have that thing. So part of it is recognizing my happiness is in actually doing the thing that I think I don't want to do, like doing the dishes or taking out the garbage or whatever it might be. And then the other I would say to you is, you and Ashley are great examples. And I would tell you with my children, we have 10, they willingly they step up and do the work.
They do.
And they just go to look for it, actually, because you know why? They see Mary and myself, and they see what true love is, and they see how much we've loved them. And they don't say, oh, you're giving me the word love. They have experienced us sacrificing and loving them. Mm-hmm. And the more they experience that and the more they see it, to your point, it's just like your question you asked, in a way, how can they see Mary and I living a life that is sacrificial and doing it all for love of them and each other and others? How can they see us do that and then not do it?
Yeah, actually, it's a very good technique, and I've used this many times, even though it's not really with the purest intention. It's more utilitarian to just try to get something done. But if they're fighting over something like the dishes, and I say, you know what, forget it. You guys have had a hard day. I'll do the dishes. Right. And I start doing it. And then they're like lined up.
They're
oh,
like, no, Dad, you can't do it.
No.
That's right.
It's like,
because they realize the injustice of it, right? They
right.
realize that, well, he's always sacrificing.
Right.
And now we're going to throw one more sacrifice on him because we don't feel like doing it right now, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's also the school of virtue, a family, because you are learning to live a certain way. You're learning to do things a certain way. Because you don't start off with them typically. I mean, you can have some natural virtues, but for the most part, you earn them, like they become a habit.
Yeah. Bill, you've been like a parenting mentor to me for many years. You know, I'm very
You've
grateful.
You've surpassed us all.
Maybe in quantity, but not necessarily qualities of different things. But one of the things you told me years ago, and I forget if I brought up the idea that when I'm frantic or whatever, and I think you actually ended up putting it in this book, but when you're got to be somewhere and it's chaos, which is every day in some way or other, and you're trying to get out of the house, you talk about how to stay calm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think I refer to in the book as 10-minute mornings. And for anybody that works outside the home, you know that there's all kinds of things, duties, responsibilities, quote, pressures. I don't believe in pressure, by the way, because you can't hand it to me. It's all perception. But it feels like that at times, right? And we can get very sort of anxious and rushed and feeling like we got to go. And you could come down saying, I got to get out. I got to get to work. I'm late, and you could just race out of the place and leave everybody completely upset. Or you could come down, which is what I try to do, and you act like you have the day off. Like you act like you have the whole day. Everybody's there, little kids, they're eating their breakfast, whatever. And you come in, you say, what are you going to be doing today? And you talk and you go, and you don't rush your voice. You're very calm, And then, I do that for 2 or 3 minutes. And then I walk over, I hug Mary, I give her a kiss and say, I'll see you tonight, or I'm doing this or whatever. And I say, okay, everybody, I'll see you a little bit later. Have a great day. I love you. I kiss. Right? They come out, like they'll watch me go out to the car, whatever it might be. Same 10 minutes.
Same 10 minutes.
And everybody left feeling loved and knowing they were loved and being at peace. And the day's off to a great start. I'm off to a great start. They're waving goodbye, it's all good, as opposed to, I'm the crazy person who has stirred everybody else up. And then everybody else, by the way, becomes like you. If you're racing around and anxious, suddenly you hear other people say, yeah, come on, let's go. We got to get this out of the way, or I got to get this, or I got to do that. And
it's contagious.
It's contagious.
But so is peace.
Yeah. And the problem is sometimes for ourselves, we don't have the awareness to recognize I actually just helped create that. In other words, I'm thinking, oh, look, they're all crazy. They got to calm down. I'm the one who stirred them up, and I didn't realize that, I had that influence.
You experience the same dynamic in leadership and business, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, leading other people when crisis mode hits or whatever.
Yeah.
How does that leader do this? So, relate it to business guys out there trying to lead a team.
It's going to sound this is going to sound corny or strange maybe to especially business people. The most motivating thing in the world to anybody is love. And I give the analogy that, people say, I don't know about that. I see people going after money, and especially money, but power, fame, all these kind of things. And I said, okay. I said, well, let's just do a little experiment here. I'll give you $1 billion and I'll make you president. Don't know if you want to be. But the only stipulation to this is you got to go live on a deserted island for the rest of your life. You got to take the deal. And of course, nobody takes that deal. Right. Now, there's some tired parents that might take a couple of weeks on the island, but they're not going to go there forever, right? So you got to ask yourself, well, why? Why would we not go on the island? If money, power, fame are the most motivating things in and of themselves, we would take the deal.
Right.
But they're not, because what's missing on the island are people and the potential for relationships and the potential for love. That's why we don't take it. So love is this thing we want most of all. So if you just know that, don't get me wrong, a business has to still operate under certain principles and hopefully ethical, moral ones. But, it's a business and it's there to operate and to create a profit. And, unless it's a nonprofit, and they still got to create a surplus. But the point is, I understand the business aspect of it. But in terms of running that business and being a leader, your intent has to be for the absolute best good for every single person that's under your care. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But if you start off with, that's my premise, that's my intent, that's where I start from, is I want the most for you. I want you to be happy. I want you to be successful. I want you to have the best life you could possibly have. I ultimately want you to know the purpose of life, like why God put you here and where you're going to go. And if you treat people that way, you may never use the word love, and they may never use the word love, but you know what? They are drawn to you because you are loving them. It's what they want most. And they recognize it. And then that gives you an opportunity that those that need help or need to be mentored or whatever, they're now more open to that happening because you haven't tied it to a materialistic thing like you got to do this or you're out. A lot of businesses run that way. And they can be big businesses that run that way, but they're not enjoyable places to exist, and nobody wants to stay in them. Matter of fact, you could almost ask, why is anybody in those businesses? It's usually to make money. Oh, okay, I'll stick with this for a while longer just to make some money or get to the pension or whatever it might be, but I'm out of here after that. I mean, I would never want to keep doing this. There's something wrong if you don't feel called to what you're doing. I don't care what it is. You could be a printer, you could be, whatever you're doing. You got to challenge yourself to say, why am I not finding actually a joy, an enjoyment in this thing that I'm doing? And if you're not, you need to look at that and just say either one of two things. I've got to change in some way so that I can see the joy to be found here, or I need to leave. I need to go do something else because I'm not even doing justice then to this place if I'm here and don't even want to be here. I've often said, in a relationship, sometimes people say, well, what if your wife loved ballet and you hated ballet? Like, you don't have no interest in ballet, right? But she loves ballet. And she comes to you so excited that she got 2 tickets to the ballet. You could think, well, you loving her is when you say, okay, we'll go to the ballet, right? And you think, oh, I'm doing a big favor here. I'm going to the ballet. But real love is when you go to the ballet and you say to yourself, I love this person so much that I would die for them. They see something in this ballet that I am clearly not seeing and I'm not appreciating. So let me look, let me try to see what is it in here that I'm missing. And maybe it's even different. Maybe she loves the music and the artistry, and maybe you could appreciate the physical prowess of a person that can leap, 6 feet off the floor. I mean, whatever it is. But the point is, you go there with the intent to see what's there.
Well, you're trying to see what the one you love sees.
That's right.
That reminds me of what we talked about right before you came in here, man.
Yeah.
The architect.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
The Familia Sagrada, which is the cathedral and basilica that's been in Barcelona, that's I think it just was completed, but it took 175 years to build this. And a guy by the name of Gaudi was the architect, and he designed this place, and he obviously died before it was completed. And at the time, I think it was kind of like a socialist government in Spain at the time, and they brought in an architect to continue his work. And I don't know if they did it purposely or not, but they didn't pick somebody who would be like Gaudi. They picked a guy from Japan who was like a Zen Buddhist, without exaggeration. But this guy was very serious, and he wanted to do a good job. So he came in and he studied Gaudi. He studied everything about him. He studied his drawings. He studied his other buildings. He studied everything because he wanted to continue the project and do honor to Gaudi because this was his project, and he was trying to honor that, right? But he remarks that he'd been doing this for a while, and he just could not get it. Like, he was missing it. And this was really bothering him. And he said, then a light came to him that said, don't look at Gaudi, but look where Gaudi is looking. And I thought, wow. So what he realized is he shouldn't be copying Gaudi. He needed to look where Gaudi was looking. Gaudi was looking to God, to Jesus Christ. And that's what he started to do. And he actually converted to Catholicism.
Amazing.
So it's So it's that idea or reality. I don't say idea because that sounds like it's not real. It's the reality of seeing what's true and beautiful and good. And so whether you're a president of a company or whatever it might be, your intent is hopefully always for the good of the other. There's certainly constraints that are natural and all part and good of being a business. So you're not a charity, you're not something else. If you make something, then that's what you make. And in order to keep making it and have jobs, it has to be profitable, and you've got to do all the right things there. But you can do that just like the 10-minute mornings. You don't have to do it like a crazy person. You don't have to beat people into submission to go try to do this thing. What you're trying to do in all cases as a leader is inspire people. And the only way to inspire people is by your example and ultimately by your love, because that attracts people. So you're not trying to say, can I compel somebody to do this? You're saying, I want somebody who says, I just want to do this because I see good here. I see something that I'm attracted to that I want more of.
You and I both have, and I think both of our spouses have a real love for Father Walter Cizik.
Oh, yeah.
And you do talk about him in the book, but again, Bill Thierfelder is unique in his ability to connect things that seemingly are unconnected. It's one of the things I strive for. I try to see if I like to connect things that seemingly don't fit together, but you do it masterfully. Everything from sports to business to everyday life, divine providence, suffering, love. This is what you do.
It's all one.
That's one. So tell us how Walter Cizik fits into your whole overall worldview.
Yeah, for those that don't know it, he wrote 2 books. He Leadeth Me and With God in Russia.
Yeah.
And very quickly, he lived in Pittsburgh, grew up kind of a rough youth. His dad, I think, thought he was going to be in prison, but instead, I think on his 18th or 20th birthday, comes to his father and says, I have a calling to be a priest. I mean, I think his father probably just fell over, right? And he had a calling specifically that he was responding to the Pope, who had asked young men to go to Rome to study the Russian language so they could go in and evangelize Russia. And he felt in his heart.
During the Soviet Union.
And he felt like this is what he was called to go do. So he goes to Rome, studies. When he's finally ordained, they tell him, can't go to Russia. And he thinks something is terribly wrong now. Wait a second, I did all this to go to Russia. They sent him to a parish in Poland. And like you said, timing's everything. So this is when the Soviet Union came in and actually occupied Poland. And so he took that as a sign. He said, aha, Russia has come in and taken over Poland, so, this must be a sign. So there's a work car that's going to enter Russia, and he gets on it. And he believes that once these people find out that he's a Catholic priest and he's bringing the sacraments and they're just going to be so grateful and joyful and so forth. Well, he gets to the work camp, and as soon as the people discover he's a Catholic priest, they report him to the authorities. He's immediately arrested, and he's put in Lubyanka prison, which was the most severe prison in the Soviet Union at the time. He's there for 5 years in solitary confinement, and he's tortured every day. And he says he almost lost his faith and his mind. Like he almost got to that point. But they wanted him to be a Vatican spy for them, and he refused. And he said, he got to a point. He said, "Do whatever you want to me, kill me, whatever you're going to do. I'm not going to do what you want me to do." So they finally say to him, "Okay, we find you guilty." This is after 5 years being tortured and we find you guilty, and they sentence him to 15 years hard labor in Siberia. And just so people know, hard labor in that context is death, because the hard labor kills you. Actually, he's sent there. First day. First of all, how he got there it's one story after another. I can't do justice to it in this short time. Even by New York speed, I can't get this all in. He almost dies just on the train. If you didn't take your bread and eat it at the right time of day, you would starve to death. I mean, it was just wild things just to get to this labor camp. He gets there. They throw him into the bottom of a coal ship where there's coal pouring in through the opening on top. They give him a shovel. They say, "Spread the coal." If you don't spread the coal piles up on top of you, you die, they put somebody on top of you to spread the coal. He said the first day, this 5 years solitary confinement, he's now in hard labor in the ship doing coal with his shovel. He's spreading the coal for 8 hours. And he said the 8 hours, his body is just breaking down, like he's numb. He has the shovel under his armpit, and he's trying to drag it at this point to cover the coal. He's in there for 15 hours in the first day. When you go back to camp, they strip search you. It's Siberia. It's 20 below zero. He's getting strip searched, and it takes like an hour. I don't know how you live even through that. He's not got enough food. There's gangs in the bunks. There's cracks on the walls that let the cold air in. He gets into his bunk. Next morning, he wakes up, and he feels like he literally can't move. Like he said his muscles felt like literally iron, like he could not move. But if you don't move, they kill you. So he finds his way out, he goes back in, and this goes on and on and on. Now, I'm telling you this for a reason. At the end, and it's in the book, and I don't have it memorized, this little piece that he wrote. But what he basically says is that God has a purpose, that divine providence has a purpose for each and every one of us, and that nothing that happens to us that does not come from the hand of God. And he repeats in this 2 or 3 paragraphs, the present moment, something like 8 or 9 times. So here is a man that is tortured for almost 20 years in Siberia and in Russia, in the worst prisons, at the end of his life saying all of it was perfect. All of what he went through, he's saying was perfect, and that he's a complete peace and just like St. Francis of Assisi, who threw himself on the floor and said, "Lord, if you want to send me 1,000 times what you've sent me, I welcome it, if it be your will." So what it just showed me was the perfection of the present moment. The fact that God is in each present moment. In other words, when we think of peak performance, I've described it to you as 100% of all your skills, talents, and abilities focused on the task at hand in the present moment. That's peak performance. I never put that together with this. All of time is present to God. He's got no past and he's got no future. So to the degree that I remain in the present moment with God is the degree I remain in union with God. If I leave him, if I ruminate about the past or I get anxious about the future, I've left him. Because he's here. He's in the here and now, in this present moment. He's not someplace else in the past or the future. He's now. So to the degree I remain in the present moment is the degree I remain in union with God. Well, I had never tied that together with peak performance and saying that, okay, if all of me, and I want to give glory to God, and I want to double my talents, and this thing that I happen to be doing in sport, could be carpenter, could be anything, but I'm applying my whole 100% of all my skills, talents, abilities on this task in the present moment, I am in perfect union with God. I'm as close to God as I can be in this present moment. There's something very comforting to know that this union with God, this relationship with God, isn't outside everything that I do. You know, somebody can say, well, I'm a business guy and I work all day long. You know, I can't be with God all day long. I'm working. If you do this the right way, you're in union with God every minute of your day in every single thing that you're doing in that business. But it's understanding that and recognizing it. And there again, to me at least, was something very comforting and reassuring that it's not a waste of time or that it's not good if it's done properly, if it's properly directed.
I was given I wrote a little book called You Have Only One Problem. And it's about the problem isn't health, isn't money, isn't conflict. It's that we haven't fully, completely, trustfully surrendered to divine providence. That's the whole idea of the book.
Yeah.
And I was given an interview recently, and the interviewer asked me a question that shocked me, kind of stopped me in my steps. And it was one of those interviews where I usually have no problem running at the mouth, but when he asked me this, I didn't know how to respond. And he asked me, he said, is it a calling? Has God given you the calling to be an apostle of the present moment? An apostle of divine providence.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to respond because it was kind of feel like, in a sense, it's a huge compliment just to even be asked that.
Right.
But one of the things that went through my mind instantly, and I'm live on the air, is I don't know if I am, but I know that Bill Thierfelder is.
Oh, no.
So it went through my mind then, and it goes through my mind now. I might want to be kind of thought as a guy who talks about divine providence, which is kind of the other side of the same coin of the present moment, you know. But
yeah.
But you've done it, Bill. You've done it. You've been a mentor to me, a friend for over 20 years. We've been business associates. Yeah. I've worked with you at the college.
The board, yeah.
In so many ways. Our kids are friends. We were just right before here, we were looking at a picture of my daughter's wedding, and your daughter was a bridesmaid.
It's her birthday.
It's her happy birthday.
Your daughter Mary sent her a happy birthday social media thing.
Yeah. And your wife has been like a mentor to my wife. But no, I mean,
we'll admit both of our wives are the reason why we're even still standing, right?
No doubt.
Yeah, they're saints that are trying to help us to become them.
No doubt, no doubt. But my whole point in kind of rambling on about that is, if people can just listen to what you just said for the last 5 minutes and everything in this whole discussion, but especially that last 5 minutes, God did put Bill Thierfelder on this planet to be an apostle of divine providence and the present moment. You are that. And that's going to be, I believe, your legacy, not all the accomplishments you've had, everything from being a great athlete to being a great sports psychologist, and then a great businessman at York Barbell, and then a great president at Belmont Abbey College. I think your ability to articulate and to teach through your words and deeds reliance and living within the present moment and reliance on divine providence, that's going to be your legacy.
Well, you're really kind, and I really appreciate everything you just said. As you know, though, I just have to always attribute it to, the glory of God. In other words, at best, we can only be stewards. I can't take credit for like one thing. As a matter of fact, I could look back and say, well, did I really double everything and everything? So this is where, I'll finish with this last point. I think often too, we compare ourselves to other people. And I think we've got to be really careful about that, because God gave each of us what he's given us, right? And it's really not comparable. I mean, we tend to do that all the time, compare ourselves to other people. God gave us certain skills, talents, and abilities, and it doesn't matter whether you're at the top of the pile, so to speak. That doesn't mean you've doubled yours. As a matter of fact, everybody else, whoever was in second, they may have actually doubled all their talents to get to the second place. Yeah. And maybe I'm only using a quarter, because God's the end of my life, I picture, and I don't mean this there's no earning our way to heaven. I just want to be really clear about saying this when I give this little analogy. But I picture at the end of my life, you go to heaven and there'll be all these people online, and they'll all have thimbles, and the thimbles will be full of water, and I'm going to have a gallon jug of water, right? And they're walking up to the front gate, and somebody's looking at their thimble and passing them right in, right? And I'm going to get there, and I'm just going to hold up my gallon, not even stop. I'm going to keep walking, and then they're going to say, whoa, where are you going? I'm saying, well, I'm going in. And they're going to say, wait a second. And I'm going to say, well, I got a gallon. They only had thimbles. And he's going to say, turn around. And I'm going to look behind me, and it's going to be the Atlantic Ocean. And he's going to say, I gave you the Atlantic Ocean and you're giving me a gallon. I only gave them thimbles. So each of us have to be careful that we are truly aware of ourselves and trying to double the skills, talents, and abilities God given us. And we're flawed human beings, but to do the best we can and to avail ourselves of the grace of God to do that.
Amazing. I could talk to you for hours, but I think we'll call it now.
That's kind. Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was really great. I mean, I love that you're doing this, and this apostolate, St. Benedict Press and all the offshoots of this, even the Catholic Company, Goodwill Publishing. I mean, it's back to the same thing, right? I mean, it's God working through you and working through others. I mean, the Word of God. I mean, think of the number of Bibles that Goodwill has distributed over the course of its existence. I mean, that's amazing.
Well, I look back. The Atlantic Ocean's behind me, and I'm carrying a thimble here, right?
And I'm bragging on my thimble.
God bless you, Bill. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks
We'll
so
do it
much
again.
for having me. Yeah, it was really wonderful.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.